Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our September 14th Useap meeting. My name is Janelle Locke. I am the chair of the committee, the panel this year. So I'd like to go ahead and get started, and if you have a copy of the agendas, you'll notice that our first thing in our agenda is to do a staff review and introductions and get to know the new people. So I'll just start by introducing myself, and then we'll just go to the staff review and go around the room for introductions. As I said, my name is Janelle Locke. I am representing parents of students with disabilities. This is my 6th year on the panel, and it's my first official meeting as the chair. I have a 15-year-old son with autism. He just started high school this year, which has been a 3-year process to even get him to go to high school, and he's having success. Additionally, I have been a life skills teacher for 9 years, but this year is my first year as an instructional coach. So I work with a lot of parents of students with disability, and I get a lot of input because on the panel we're representing the whole stakeholder group, not just our own individual child. And so I try to get input from all the parents that I work with to be able to represent this stakeholder group. So I'm going to turn the... I need to point out, this is a public meeting. It is recorded, and we need to use our microphones. And so when it's your turn to speak, just turn on the button and make sure that red ring is on so that we can get the recording.
Good morning. I'm Leah Voorhees. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support here at the State Board of Education, and that encompasses being the State Director of Special Education. So your responsibility, which you're going to learn about today as panel members, is to advise me so that I can advise the board, because really you are an advisory panel to the board, and I'm the conduit. So this is not my meeting, but I'm the representative of the State Board of Education at this meeting.
Okay, I'm Karen Conder. I am a parent of actually 2 children with special needs. I'm also the Utah PTA Special Needs Specialist.
My name is Shelley Halverson. I represent special education administrators. I'm the Director of Special Education for the Salt Lake City School District. I was a special ed teacher in a behavior support class for 15 years before I became an administrator.
My name is Amanda Longwell. I am a parent of a child with a disability. She's about 5.5 years old, born with Down syndrome, and trying to make a change.
I am Amy Nicholson. I am a parent of a child who has a disability, as well as representing the rural area that I live in, and I'm also a special education teacher.
My name is Gina Troop, and I'm the parent of 3 kiddos with special needs. I have one with autism, one with some mild mental retardation, and one they're still working on her diagnosis. She's our wild one. I also serve on the ICC, working with Baby Watch, early intervention, 0 to 3, and I'm also a foster parent, so I'm really passionate about making sure that foster kiddos in the system get the services that they need in schools, even though they transition around.
I'm Amy Hurst. I'm a parent consultant at the Utah Parent Center, and I also have 2 kiddos with special needs. And I've been working at the Utah Parent Center for about 2 years, specializing in, the special ed arena with them.
I'm Deanne Shields. I represent parents of students with disabilities. I have 3 children with learning disabilities, and I'm a former special ed teacher, and I'm also on the board of the Learning Disabilities Association of Utah.
It's lit now.
Sorry, technical difficulties over here. Allison White. I'm representing charter schools. I also am the caretaker of an adult sibling that just turned 35 yesterday. Her birthday was yesterday. I'm also on the board for the Utah Parent Center.
I am Elliot Howell. You might have previously known me as Riley. I am a senior at East Hollywood High School, and I'm a student representative.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Howell, and I'm a parent of a student with disabilities, this one right here. And also I work as a special education administrator with several different charter schools in the state.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Brady. I'm here as a parent with a
Well, that's true. That's true. And we'll talk about the expectation for that on the panel here in a minute. But if you can have some idea of what the demographics are of the state, of the gender distribution of big city versus rural, and then have the panel reflect that, that's always the goal. It can be a challenge, especially in a really big state that's geographically large, like Utah. Smaller states don't have as big an issue with this, of getting that kind of diversity from different parts of the state, but know that it's always the goal. And as you have an opportunity to nominate other people to come onto the panel, it's something to think about, to try and have that be reflective of what the actuality in the state is. The really important part that the law says is that the majority of the members of the panel, at least 51%, must be individuals with disabilities and parents of children with disabilities. So, let's see, hang on, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, 24, 20. We've got 26 people in the room. How many are parents of kids with disabilities or are disability themselves? Very good. You've blown that one out of the water. Well done. Good job. That's not true in many of the panels that I go to do training for. They just have a really hard time getting folks there. So this goes through and talks about who's supposed to be on the panel. And I'd like to just do this again by raise of hand when it's your turn, what your role here is on the panel, identify it. Parents of children with disabilities aged birth through 26. Who's here? All right, very good. An individual with disabilities, our student there. Teachers. We've got one teacher. Two, three, four. Very good. Raise your hands high.
But only raise your hand if that's the stakeholder group you are pointing to. Some of us are teachers, but we're not representing that stakeholder group.
Yeah, stick to your stakeholder role. So we've got 2 there. Very good. All right, representative of institutions of higher education.
She's not here.
That's one person who's not here, but she is on the panel.
On the panel.
Actually, we have 2, don't we? Maggie and...
But I thought, I think Summer is representing her stakeholder group as parents.
Okay. Yeah. But she is.
But she is.
True.
Okay, very good. State and local education officials. Leah, Christina, folks, Shelley, very good. All right. Administrators of programs for children with disabilities. No, and that's good. That's good. You can actually be more than one on this, as long as the stakeholder group is covered. State representatives from child welfare responsible for foster care. We got someone here
today, but we do have someone on the panel.
Tanya.
Oh, okay, very good. That's a new one in the law since when it was reauthorized in 2004. Representatives of other state agencies.
So we have the Parent Center, Juvenile Justice.
Okay, that's right.
Disability Law Center.
Very good. Okay. Representatives of private schools and public charter schools. We had a charter school person here. Yes, Allison. Very good. Okay, at least one representative of a vocational, community, or business organization concerned with the provision of transition services.
Amy.
Yeah, and she's not here.
Okay, so some of these real specific ones are the folks that weren't able to come today.
She's from Voc Rehab.
Perfect. Representatives from state juvenile and adult correction agencies, and that's Michelle over here. And then one more that is also new in the law, this last reauthorization, state and local officials that represent homeless children.
He's not here.
That's Jeff. Okay. All right. You can go across categories and represent more than one thing, so I don't see that being a problem. The only one that I wanted to emphasize today is that if you're here as a parent representative, your child should be within age 0 to 26. You can be a different representative of another organization. Your child can be older, but then you won't be representing the parents of kids in school. And that's not a big deal. It's just something to keep in mind. Then, here are the things that we feel like are going to help you do a good job as a panel member. Read the bylaws. They're in your packet on the left side. They're a good thing to have a clear understanding of so you understand why you're here. Make sure you come to the meetings. There's 4 a year. Am I correct? 4 meetings?
4 to 5 this time we're thinking.
Very good. That's not very many meetings to try and get a lot of work done. So it's important that you be here for those meetings as you can. A lot of times the state, Emily or Janelle, will send you information ahead of time about what you're going to be talking about, the agenda, the minutes from the previous meeting. Your homework is to read that, be ready, and come to the meeting with being as informed as you possibly can. Participate. It's easy, and during this orientation and training, it's just a lot of listening, and I know that. But when it's time to actually do the work, we hope that you'll participate and not just be a wallflower. It's important for you to bring your voice, that you have a purpose for being here, and we hope that you'll talk and say what it is that you need to say. Work as a team. We'll talk about that a little more later, about how to come to consensus and how important that is. Support each other, and then know that you can make a difference. We feel, and it's a training and orientation every year is a good idea. Utah does this. A lot of times TASTE provides it. Sometimes the training is just for the new members, and that's okay. Either way works. We wanted to talk to you and show you a few things that are really good resources for you to have. Many of them are in the packet, a few are ones that you'll have to find. But your panel bylaws or guidelines are really important. To know your open meeting requirements in Utah and have an understanding of who can be here when it's time for public participation. Your annual report, and the annual report is not in the packet, but I believe it's on the website. Yeah, so you can always get at it from the state website. Information about who is on the state staff is a good idea. If you don't have a pretty clear understanding of how the state's organized and who's doing what, ask for an organizational chart. I know Leah's got one. So if you feel like that's something that's going to help you information-wise about who's working here at the state, that's available to you. That acronym booklet will help you. The meeting schedule about what you're going to need to do for the year, and then reimbursement information, because you're supposed to be reimbursed for travel and that sort of thing if you end up needing that, if you don't live in the area. Then there's other things that can help you somewhat as you go. There's a website about state advisory panels that I'll show you at the very end. That's a great resource of things to show you what other states are doing and give you a sense of what the possibilities are. The federal regulations, state regulations, those are all online. The ones that apply to you particularly are in that primer in the packet. Knowing what the state performance plan is and the APR, and I know you're going to hear about that over the course of the year. Leah will provide that information, or someone she assigns to. What your level of determination is in Utah, a little bit about the history of special education, and general supervision, which is also in the packet. Those will all help you just do a better job. The things that are addressed in your bylaws really talk about who's here and what it is that you're supposed to do. But your tenure on the panel is addressed in the Utah bylaws. It's in Article 4, Section 2. If you want to get them out, you have 3-year terms, and you're allowed to have 2 and be on the panel. If you get called to be the panel chair and that sort of thing, then it can add a year. And did I read that correctly? Yeah. The things that I didn't find in the bylaws when I looked at it was anything about if someone needed to resign or if there was a vacancy or if someone needed to be kicked off the panel because they either weren't participating or they weren't being helpful with what was going on. It doesn't say anything about those things. Something to think about. The bylaws really ought to be reviewed at least once a year. Something to think about if you feel like that's important information to have in there. A lot of states do put information about resignation, vacancies, and terminations if they're needed. All right. In your advisory panel, you've got some leadership here. A lot of states call it the executive committee. Here they call it the leadership. And you've got a chairperson, who is Janelle. You've got a chair-elect. Who is that?
We're electing that person today.
That's work today for the chair-elect. Very good. And then there are 3 other people on the panel who are assigned to be part of the leadership team. And they will always work with the director there. There's a lot of best practice that we're going to talk about, and you're going, well, that only applies to the chair. Why do I need to hear that? Well, someday you may be the chair if you're part of this panel, and so we like to share that information across. Know that that's something that you might be dealing with in the future. And one of them is, what are the suggested roles? In the bylaws, it says that that chair schedules the meetings, develops the agenda with the state, chairs the meetings, and Janelle's done a good job of that. And then when it's time to develop task forces, whether that's around the priority areas or other issues that need to be done, like a review of the bylaws or to look at the parent survey that the state does, then those task forces can be established, but Janelle would be the one to help set those up and get those in place. One thing that it didn't say is who's got responsibility for the annual report. Who does that in Utah? The annual report for the advisory panel.
So Emily, really, but it's pretty simple because we take the recommendations that come out of the panel. Sorry, it's being recorded, so I should talk here. So basically Emily does, but we take the recommendations that come out of the panel and any key issues, and we post those on the website. So it's less formal than some other annual reports, but it's easy to access.
We like easy to access. It works great. All right. And then you will have, like I mentioned, the task forces. Those will be set up based on the priority areas and different things that need to be done and the work that the panel needs to do. You should report on the task forces here at this meeting when you have them, about what you've been working on, any decisions made, that sort of thing. Put together the recommendations, and that memo that's on the one side that we use as a good example is a sample of how that would work. The bylaws also say that if you need an expert or someone who's really familiar with a particular priority, they can be brought in from the outside to participate on these task forces, which is a great thing. A lot of times the people in the room don't have all the information they need, and it's really helpful to have that in there. All right, we're going to talk about how to represent your stakeholder group, and then we'll take a break after that. You represent your stakeholder group. And we've talked about that. Remember that you're representing everyone, not just yourself in your own individual situation when it comes time to do that. And there's times when your opinion might be different from the stakeholder group. So we've got Michelle here from Juvenile Corrections who's dealing with kids with disabilities in juvenile corrections, and it may be that her personal opinion about how it should go is different than what the juvenile corrections system says it should go. Well, she needs to bring who she's the stakeholder of to the table rather than her personal opinion. Now, I'm guessing they'll always be the same, but that conceptually, remember that you need to be representing your stakeholder group rather than your own personal opinion. Your voice needs to be the stakeholder group's voice. All right, and how do you represent your stakeholder group? So we've got people here from the folks that aren't here, but the parents, the foster care, the juvenile corrections, the early childhood, the higher education, all of those folks, the teachers, especially administrators are here. How are you going to bring information? How are you going to find out what your stakeholder group's interests are, what their voice is? And I'd like to hear some ideas about that. How are you going to know what your stakeholder group's interests are so that you can represent them well? Yes.
Well, I think a lot of times we attend meetings and things. Like last night I was at a meeting with foster parents, and special education came up, people were like, I can't get into an IEP, this and that. So I was actually, with this in mind, I'm like, tell me kind of some of the things that are going on. So asking people that you come in contact with.
That's perfect. That's exactly right. Any other ideas? That's an excellent one. Are there other approaches? Yes, Emma.
I often bring it up at faculty meetings, and also I'm a member of GEA, our teachers union, and I talk about it with the union reps from other schools as well.
That's a great example. Any other ideas? Yes, sir.
Social media. I think it's a great place to access information. A lot of parents will complain on social media about different things going on at schools. You can kind of you have to gauge that in a little bit, but I think it's a great place just to get information and especially reach some of the areas where you cannot reach because you're not physically there. So
that's excellent. Yeah. Social media is a real good barometer of what's going on and some of the issues that come out. Any others that you can think of? Yes, Janelle.
I no longer serve in this capacity, but I used to be the president of a parent support group. And so we would have monthly meetings, and I would be able to get input from a variety, and I'd ask them to get input from friends that they knew. And so we try to.
So a lot of them, whenever they have something that they with the system that isn't working very well for them, they'll tell me about it so that I can try to give that input.
That's brilliant. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. So thank you. Well, we're at the beginning of another section, and I think this is a fairly long one, so let's take our break here. It's 10:10, so we're moving ahead by 5 minutes on the clock. It's 10:10. Let's be back here at 10:25, ready to start again, and we'll keep going. Okay?
Okay, the restrooms are right behind us. We also have downstairs, right as you walk out of the elevator, across the elevator, we have vending machines if you're in need of something from a vending machine.
Hi, come on in, have a seat. We'll get started again. There we go. Well done.
Tanya, there are 2 openings up here if you want to join us at the table.
And yeah, right there and right there. And Tanya, once you settle down, do you mind introducing yourself so that the panel members know which stakeholder group you represent?
Hello. My name is Tanya Alvarez. I'm the foster care program administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services for the state. I work at the state office, and I'm over policy and procedure and community. Now I've added a new title, foster care community relations. So that's who I am.
Perfect.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so we're going to turn the time back over to Shauna to complete our training.
Sounds good. And we'll be done by noon. And hang in there. We're making progress. Okay. We're going to talk about the advice part of what it is that you do. Your work is to provide advice to the board through Leah about things that are going on in the state, and we will talk about that. This isn't just a sit and listen. It's a working council. You actually have jobs to do, and one of those is to be advisory. By definition, that's the thing below the star, an advisory group regularly gives suggestions and advice to organizations, especially about a particular subject or area of activity, and we'll talk about what those are supposed to be for you. But before we get started on that, we need to clear up what the difference between advisory and advocacy is, and they are not the same thing. There's a place for one in this panel, and there is not for the other in this panel. Advocacy is not a panel role. It's not what's supposed to go on here, to take sides, to support something completely, to plead your case, to argue about anything. That is advocacy, and it's not supposed to happen here. Now, there is one place for advocacy at panel meetings, and as we go through the process of how you're supposed to come up with advice, we'll show where that is. But for the most part, when you're having your discussions, when you're visiting about priorities, advocacy is not your purpose here. Just so you're confident, though, that role of advocacy, which is needed in the world of services for kids with disabilities, advocacy is really needed, but there are other agencies that do that. There are other situations that provide it. Every state has what's called a protection and advocacy agency, and that is part of their role. There are disability organizations out there that take very much an advocacy position and things that are specific to disabilities, like the National Center on Learning Disabilities, or there are several dyslexia outfits. There are national centers on autism. There are national centers for just about every disability out there, and their role is advocacy. They bring their voice to what's needed along those lines. It's not you. And then there are professional organizations as well. We mentioned these a little bit. The teachers have an organization. There's a big one out there called the Council for Exceptional Children, CEC, and they have subcategories like the Council for Administrators of Special Education. They have some that are specific to teachers, some that are specific to early childhood, some that are specific to secondary ed. Their role is advocacy, and they do a good job of presenting what the issues are, getting them out on the table, and so that people can deal with them. But that is not what's supposed to happen here. Here, your role is advisory, where you give advice, and we'll talk about how to get to that advice. You counsel, you recommend, you suggest, but you don't advocate for a particular position or issue, except during this process that we're going to talk about right here. Now, in my opinion, this is the most important slide in the whole training to get you through the process of how to provide the advice. First of all, an issue or a priority is selected, and we're going to do that this afternoon. You may have some long-standing priorities. Some of them can go more than 1 year if they're an issue for the state, but this afternoon we'll have a priority setting activity, and so an issue is selected for you to deal with. Then you get some resources and information about that issue. How do you think you can get some of those resources? Where should your information about a particular priority area come from? What would you do? Let's say you decide that the issue is this dyslexia that got brought up earlier today. Let's say you want to make a recommendation that has to do with services for kids with dyslexia in the state. How would you get information about what the issues are and what the problems are, what you need to recommend about? What would you do? How would you find out? Yes, Christina.
I mean, one recommendation would be to invite someone in that field, in that area, to come and present to us and share what they're hearing as far as the issues and their priorities are.
Perfect. That's exactly right. Yes.
Also, stakeholder involvement. The minute she mentioned that, we went running over there because we're like, we have issues with that. So...
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All those things that we talked about of how to represent your stakeholder group, that's where you get your resources and information. And then remember that the state also has a lot of information, and you can say, what's our data? What's this? How many kids are there with dyslexia in the state? And Leah and her team will be able to provide that information. So there's lots of ways to get at the resources to give you a foundational understanding of what the issues are. The next thing that you do after you establish the priority and get some information about it is this is where the advocacy is possible. You bring your perspective as a member of the group and bring it to the table. Here's what I've seen happen. Here's what the issues are. Here is my understanding of it. And so someone who works in dyslexia, a parent of a child with dyslexia, this would be a really good time for you to bring that perspective. But it's not the only perspective. The real perspective after that is your stakeholder group. So if you're in here as a parent, Try to have talked to parents of kids with dyslexia. Ask what's going on at the school. Teachers of kids with dyslexia, that sort of thing. But this is true for any priority area. Bring that stakeholder input as you can. If your role on the panel doesn't particularly apply to a particular issue, then do your best and listen well. Then after you've got all that input and have brought that to the table, then it's time for a panel discussion about it. You talk as a group, what could we recommend to improve this situation for the kids with disabilities in Utah? And you come up with the ideas based on your experience, based on your group wisdom. You come up with what you feel like would be a good recommendation for the state and talk about it. And then you write down and establish what that advice should be, what the suggestions are for the state, what you think ought to happen in order to address the priority that you had come up with. And then finally, hopefully it will provide some change. Once you give it to the state, once you give it to Leah, who takes it to the board, they decide, having the larger state perspective of everything that's going on, whether or not to take the advice that you give. But you will have done your job to provide the advice. And I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot, Leah. Can you give an example of when you've taken the advice of the advisory panel to, or looked at the recommendations and how that process has worked once they've given the advice?
Yeah, I can give you a very concrete advice example from about halfway through the year, maybe either this meeting last year or the meeting after. We talked about licensing, because teacher licensing was, the rules related to licensing were being revised because the statute was going to be revised in the recent legislative session. And so for those of you who are here, we had a long discussion about what we thought was important to consider for the licensing of special educators. And we made a list of maybe 7 recommendations to the board. And one of them, and the board accepted all of the recommendations, but one of them was a recommendation that the board had not previously considered. They considered all the rest of the recommendations, but one of the recommendations was that that teachers of students with disabilities would not be able to keep a provisional license for more than several years, that they would either have to get their license or that it wouldn't be renewed, just so that teachers for students with disabilities wouldn't be able to remain unlicensed again and again and again, for those of you who remember that particular recommendation. That had not come to the board previously, and they did discuss that, and the Teachers Association actually discussed that. They didn't need to cut and paste accept that recommendation, because what they decided to do for all teachers was actually quite similar. So they did take that recommendation and made it into policy, and even kind of on a bigger scope than we had intended in our discussion, because we were talking about special ed teachers. But when they created the new licensing laws, they created 2 different kinds of teachers: associate teacher, educator really, because it encompasses more than just teachers, but associate educator and professional educator, and documented the need for anyone who wants to move from associate to professional to be able to meet specific criteria, and to not be able to just continue to be an associate teacher forever and not move into professional. So
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's a great example. Thank you for being willing to share that. You do have some effect. You can have some really good effect, and look what a broad effect across the state your initial idea had. So once you get the advice, theoretically, it's going to make some change. There are several ways you can provide the advice. Write a memo, write a position paper, make sure it gets on the website. It's going to be reflected in the meeting minutes, that sort of thing. There's lots of ways to do it, and there's not one better than the other. Just make sure the state knows what the advice is. We recommend that 1-pager that's in here, and of course it's Utah's own example. Like I said, I use that in many, many states without identifying that it's Utah. This is a great way to do it. So keep it up and consider yourselves, yeah, we're doing a great job of that. All right. The question then is, who gets the advice? And Leah mentioned this at the beginning. You are supposed to give this to the state director. It would not be appropriate for you to bypass her and go directly to the board or to the state superintendent or some other individual with your advice. It needs to go right to her. And the reason for that is, why would you think that would be? Why does the advice need to go to Leah rather than any other person in this? She's your conduit. She's the one that's got the picture for special education for the state and is going to be able to do the best job with it. And I'm going to put her on the spot here again for just a minute and talk about the role of the state director in the state. And she's going to put on her humble face right now while I do this. The role of the state director is one of the hardest in education as a whole. And what reflects that is how big the turnover is for state directors. Our agency helps do what's called a new director orientation back with the Office of Special Education Programs, the federal agency in the state, and we do this about once a year, sometimes twice a year. Last year's new director group had 10% of the, is kind of the catch-all. Advise the SEA of unmet needs within the state in the education of children with disabilities. And that when we set priorities this afternoon, that's what we'll be looking at. What are the unmet needs that we should focus on this year? For instance, the example that Leah just gave, you were having a lot of teachers who were having provisional certification and were staying there. So you provided advice to move out of that situation, and it worked. At least the expectation is there about it. The example B on the slide, students aren't being adequately served in juvenile and adult correctional facilities. A lot of times kids with disabilities get lost in that system, and that's why there's a specific person assigned to this and bringing that attention to the table. That continues to be a problem, and you see that it's an unmet need in the state, then have it be a priority.
That was a priority that we had last year, year before.
Was it? Okay.
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Very good. Excellent. Figure out what the unmet needs are, and this is where your voice about what's going on in the state will come to really help things go along. But that is your biggest and main function. There are some more functions that don't have to do with providing advice. You can publicly comment on rules and regulations proposed about the education of children with disabilities, both within the state and federally. Now, we talked about IDEA that hasn't been reauthorized as soon as it should have, but when it does, you as an advisory panel can pull together comments from the Utah State Special Ed Advisory Panel and publicly comment on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act reauthorization when that time comes to happen. That is something that you can do. Your comments ought to be decided as a group and then submitted as a group. And when the feds see that a group of people have provided a comment, they tend to read them. Well, they read all of them, and they make a point of sharing that they do, but it has a big impact when they know that this is representing an entire state of what the comments are. All right, the third function is to advise the state in developing evaluations and reporting on data to the secretary under 618, Section 618 of the Act. And Section 618 doesn't mean anything to most of you in the room, but it does to Leah, and it does to the state staff. It's a section of the law that says you need to tell us this, 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 and this. And it's a lot of work to pull all that information together. You can advise the state once you hear about that data on what may need attention in the state. And data's where it's at. Every state's using it. The data that is submitted, you can see a lot of information based on it if you do a good data analysis. And I imagine Utah does a data drill down of some kind. Ask for the information about the data drill down. What did you find out? What did you learn? What's not happening? What is happening? What could we have a good influence on? The fourth advisory panel function is to advise the state in developing corrective action plans to address findings identified in federal monitoring reports under Part B. Your state gets essentially a grade from the feds once they submit their data. That annual performance report in February is read by the feds, and they look it over and they say Utah is meeting the requirements of the law, or they need assistance in meeting the requirements of the law, or they need improvement in meeting the requirements of the law. We'll go over, they've got a little section in the presentation, we'll go over that a little later, but they get a grade. You should hear what the grade is, know what it is, why Utah got it, and then if there are any problems, maybe consider those as priorities and what needs to happen. So let's say, use the example that's on the slide there, the state just had a visit from the Office of Special Education Programs and were found to be in noncompliance about fiscal issues. Ask why. Ask what the problem is. Is there a problem with the system? Is there a problem with the right information getting to the right people? And if so, then your job would be to come up with advice about how to solve the problem. And then Leah can take that and decide what to do with it. It has to do with monitoring. Now, does that mean you write the corrective action plan that the state has to do? No, you don't. The state writes that, but you can provide advice about what approach the state could take in order to solve the problem. All right, the fifth advisory panel function is to advise the state in developing and implementing policies relating to the coordination of services for children with disabilities. This is why there are people on this panel that are from other agencies. And several of them aren't here, but like vocational rehabilitation is supposed to be here. We've got someone from Baby Watch here, and Baby Watch is in the Department of Health, but deals with kids with disabilities who are supposed to transition into the school-age programs. How does that work? It's complicated when you've got it between one agency and another, and yet all the kids are the same kids. Moving from one to another, who's got responsibility? How do you move from an IFSP, which is the equivalent of an IEP for little kids, to an IEP and have the transition be smooth? And who's responsible? And who provides the data? And all of that sort of thing. So a lot of states between agencies have what are called MOUs, or Memorandum of Understanding, that spell out, we're responsible for this, you're responsible for this, this is here, we'll cross over, and we'll make it work and make this transition seamless. With voc rehab, with juvenile systems, I imagine. There's lots of different ways for the groups to connect and coordinate those services. Your role as an advisory panel is you can help advise about those Memorandum of Understanding and how they're supposed to work. You can advise about those. In fact, you have a responsibility to. So you should know what the memorandum are, and that's something to ask the state for. They'll provide them, and so that you can see them. All right, advisory panel function number 6. You should provide advisory panel. The state is supposed to let you know what the due process hearing findings and decisions are in the state. Now, from if I remember right, Utah doesn't have a lot of these, very few. If you did see a spike in due process hearings, then you would start to ask the question, why are we seeing a spike in due process hearings? And you would look for trends rather than individual situations. The key there is some parent is going to have a problem with some district at some point. If it doesn't get solved before the point it gets to a hearing, then you look at that issue, but only if it's something that happens more than one time across the state. Your job isn't to look at individual situations and issues except as they apply in a big picture. So if you start to see 5 due process hearing on the same topic, then you say, there's something wrong with the system here, and that's where we need to find out what's going on. Our role as an advisory panel would be to study that issue, find out what the problems are, and then work on it. And it's really important that you be very confidential with these sorts of discussions. We'll talk a little bit more about confidentiality as a minute. If there's not a lot of due process hearings, as there are not in Utah, then don't worry about it. Just be ready that if that does turn out to be an issue, then it's something that you can address and is an advisory panel function. Now, this is one that's in the law, in actually a different place from the advisory panel work, but it's a waiver of non-supplant requirement. It's rarely an issue. In fact, I personally don't know of any state that has had to do this.
We haven't ever.
Utah hasn't ever.
Yeah, in the time that I've been here, or the time that Glenna had been here, we haven't ever done a waiver of non-supplant.
So I wouldn't worry about that. The information will be provided when it's time. If you end up needing to do that, it's a real complicated piece around the state providing funds, and it's not one that you will likely have to deal with. This one, however, is one that the panel dealt with last year, determining disproportionality. And this is also in a different part of the law. States get to determine the risk. There's requirements in the law about disproportionate representation and significant disproportionality, and the state has to address it, but the state gets to decide at what level is it disproportionate. And so you did that work last year to prepare for what we thought was going to be a law that would be implemented in July. And then right before the start of July, we got news that it's been postponed for 2 years. And I didn't ever hear, is Utah going to do it anyway? Or are you going to
implement anyway? We did all the work, so we're just moving forward.
Some states are keeping the option to move down the road for 2 years and wait and see. But it sounds like you're going to use the work that you did this last year. So that's one of your functions, and you did it, and the work is done, and well done. If it has to be renewed and done again, I expect you'll get brought into the picture then again as well. All right, those are the 8 functions. Those are the things that are your job as a panel. You just read your job description, essentially. Any questions about any of those panel functions? Okay, the big one, as I said, is that first one about unmet needs in the state. The others you'll be kind of guided through to know what it is you need to do and provide information about. So now we're going to work on how you can do it. We've talked about why you're here, what you're supposed to do. Now let's do some best practice and some here's how you know what to do. The first thing is to know your bylaws. Some states call them operating procedures, and yours are very interesting because they say the resolution establishing the Utah Advisory Panel, and you're supposed to advise the board. You're the only state I know of that bypasses provide the SEA as with information. You're supposed to provide it to the board via a conduit, but that's fine.
Comment?
Yes, please.
And the reason for that is because we have a state law. So we have a unique system. Our education system works a little bit different in Utah in that the governor is not responsible for the education system. The State Board of Education is responsible for the education system. So you, like I said earlier, you're an advisory board. You're an advisory panel to the State Board of Education, which is the policy-making body. And in many states, there's an agency that works in between the policy-making, and we have a more direct relationship. But the board has designated me as their liaison in special ed rule. And so statute gives the board so statute is Utah code, gives the board the authority to make educational decisions, and the board has designated me as their liaison to you through special ed rule. So that there's a section in the special ed rules about the advisory panel, and that's where it says you give me the recommendations and I take them to the board.
Perfect. Perfect, and that is unusual. Like I said, Utah's the only state that I know that's got that kind of language in it, but it appears to work because your advice is being taken and implemented, so it's working. That's right. All right. The bylaws, having good bylaws will help you function as a good panel. I read yours. You're doing a pretty good job with them. The things that I put in red there are the things that I couldn't find when I read the bylaws. You don't have anything about the open meeting requirements in there. Not sure if it's important. If you've got a good sunshine law and everybody understands it, then I'm not sure it needs to be there. But that's a good idea to keep in mind. We talked before, it doesn't have anything about members who resign or what to do to replace them. You've got a good process in place. It just doesn't say how in there. And then the specifics about your annual report aren't in there either. Good practice is, and the reason we're saying good practice for everyone to hear is you might be the panel chair in a year or two. You might be the one saying, we really ought to do this. It's good practice to do it. It's a good idea to at least review the bylaws as a group once a year and make sure they reflect reality. Bylaws can often just be set on the side and off and away, and then everybody starts doing things just a little bit different and they don't reflect what actually happens. And it's a good idea to keep that on the front page. All right. Another thing that's going to help you do a good job as a panel is to be clear about your open meeting laws and have a good understanding of how that's supposed to work. You're supposed to adhere to the open meeting laws. Some states call them sunshine laws. Make sure your meetings are announced in advance. I believe Emily takes care of that by putting that on the website so that she's got information about it. And other than the orientation, and I guess this could be public as well, but I don't believe it's announced that way, the meetings are supposed to be open to the public and if they can see. Do you have visitors much to the advisory panel meetings?
Not much, once in a while. Not that we don't already invite.
Oh, that you specifically invite.
But
Okay.
I think in the 5 previous years, I can only think of 2 times that we had a visitor that we didn't know was going to be here.
Okay. Very good. So not very often. Yeah. 3 procedures in here.
Yeah, we do.
So when it's time to do something official, then you pull in a motion and a second and that sort of thing. Robert's Rules of Order are what's called parliamentary procedure, and they can help you. The handout that's in the packet is a good one that I found that helps explain how to do Robert's Rules of Order without being the full manual to do the British parliamentary system. It's a very complicated thing. If you take it, it's an entirety. But for a meeting like this, there's only a few things you need to be able to do. And that handout will help you decide, okay, if I want to do this, I should say this. If I want to accomplish this, I should say this. And it's things that really apply to something that this panel would do instead of the entire scope of parliamentary procedure. So know that resource is in there to help you, and it's a good idea to manage a meeting and keep people on track and doing the right thing. Another thing that really helps a meeting be effective is to have a great agenda. It's not too specific, but it's not too vague either. And the one that I looked at that you've got for the whole day fits just perfectly. It's got time issues, it's got specific things to cover without being too detailed, and you're doing a good job with that. It's important that the panel chair and the state do the agenda together so that all of the right information can get there. It's a good idea for you to have the agenda in advance, which I'm pretty sure you did, and to plan for it and do that well. There's some things that are good to have on agendas. The past notes, any next steps that were from the last meeting, bring to this meeting so that they stay on people's minds. Committee reports, updates about different things. The more detailed you can be with what the agenda needs to accomplish, the better, without being too prescriptive, so that you've got some room for comment, room for growth, room for change. Anyway, it's a good idea to put your panel functions on the back of the agenda. Do you do that? Yep, perfect. You guys are doing a great job. Yeah. Preaching to the choir here is what we're doing. All right. And then there are materials and handouts that should help you. That primer, be sure and read it. Have a good understanding of what's in there. And for a good meeting, look at the agenda, read the handouts, check the last meeting's minutes, because it helps bring your brain back to what the purpose is of what's going on here. All right, let's talk about consensus for just a minute. When it's time to vote on something in this room, the majority, it's a majority vote rather than a quorum. Isn't that what I read in the bylaws? I've done 2 panel trainings this week, and they're starting to blur together in my mind. I believe it says that decisions are made by a simple majority vote of who's in the room. Some states say you've got to have a particular quorum, and it's got to be a percentage of that quorum, but I think yours says majority.
I'm pretty sure it was. That's how we always been running it.
That's how we've been running it. Let's hope the bylaws say that. Right. So really, consensus is important for your group. Now, consensus isn't where you all agree on everything, but consensus is when you come to something that you can publicly support. And it's not unanimous. In fact, it's not a vote of any kind. It's not where everybody's going to be completely happy, but it is where you're willing to support what's going on and what needs to be discussed and what needs to be attended to. Let's talk for just a minute about confidentiality. Who knows what FERPA stands for? Another acronym. Throw it out, Amy.
It's like HIPAA, but for students, it's their privacy that we don't discuss specific individuals and their situation.
That's right. It stands for Family Equal Rights and Privacy Act. Very similar to HIPAA, but specific to school-age kids. Family Equal Rights and Privacy. So as you're working here in the panel and you talk, especially when you come as a parent and you've talked to other parents that are out there, it's going to be tempting. Oh, my friend Susan and her daughter Misty have this problem at this school, and the teacher, Mr. Dunn, is just a wreck, and he's just doing a terrible job. There's 3 mistakes right there in that, okay? You shouldn't say the name of the parent. You certainly shouldn't say the name of the student nor the name of the teacher. It's got to be washed of all of that confidential information as you bring it. Now, sometimes the issue is going to be big enough or the circumstance famous enough in the disability community, and people in this community talk to each other, that you're going to know who it is even without the names. And it's important that you not talk about it outside of the room. Okay, don't run home and tell your family, guess what I heard today. That's going to be important, that the confidentiality aspect is important. You will hear stuff that you may be able to personally identify. It's important to keep that quiet. And it's not a bad idea to have a small in-service every year on what those confidentiality specifics are. If you haven't done that, it's an idea, Janelle, for the future. Just food for thought. And it doesn't have to be long, 10 or 15 minutes. Just remind everybody about the confidentiality requirements of FERPA, that Family Equal Rights and Privacy Act. All right, compensation. You're supposed to serve the panel without compensation, but the state is supposed to reimburse you for expenses to get here, whether it's mileage or if you come from the south end of the states and end up staying in a hotel, that sort of thing. The state should help take care of you that way. Have you ever done virtual participation in the meetings where someone who can't be here can participate via teleconference or anything?
We haven't done that.
Haven't needed it? Okay. It's some states, especially if they're geographically huge, have been starting to do that, and we've got some advice, some good counsel about how to manage that. If and when you do that, come talk to us. We'll help you work through that sort of thing, but we won't spend any time on it today. There's also supposed to be interpreters, if anybody needs one, whether it's for hearing impairment or other assistance, that sort of thing, and the state should provide those services when they're needed. Another good way to run a meeting and have good involvement is to keep good minutes. Emily does that. They shouldn't be too expansive. They don't need to be like a court stenography situation where every single thing is written down, bullet points of things talked about, and especially the recommendations that you come up with should be included in the minutes, and any next steps should be there. Okay? All right, that's just some good advice about meetings, but let's talk about council priorities now. We're going to do a priority setting activity this afternoon over on this sticky wall, and you'll all get to see how that works, but I want to talk a little bit about how many priorities to have. The scope of disabilities is enormous. You've got issues around each specific disability eligibility category out there. You've got systemic stuff about teachers. You've got systemic stuff about administrators. You've got due process. You've got a zillion different things. Count that? Zillion. You've got a zillion different things that you can work on. And you're going to have to whittle it down to just a few. Because if you don't keep it small in number, you won't get anything done. And it's really important that you be able to focus in on things that are really important. Now, here's the way that you're going to decide what those annual priorities should be. First of all, you're going to study current and emerging issues that impact children with disabilities. You're going to hear about those from the people that you represent as a stakeholder, and you may read about it, you may see it in the news, social media, all of that sort of thing may help you. So find out what those are and be ready to bring those to the table as you decide what your annual priorities are. If you can look beyond the state to national trends, that helps. Can't hurt. And then ask for input from other panel members, ask for input from the state. Look at the data. I mentioned before, data is where the action is at. That is very true. See what the dispute resolution cases are about. Know what Utah's monitoring level is. See what the data from that data drill down that the state does. What is it telling us? What do we know? Are the kids with disabilities graduating at the same rate as kids without disabilities? And if not, why not? What should we do about it? That sort of thing. The state systemic improvement plan, you're going to hear more about that from the state this afternoon, probably, or maybe the next meeting. Use that information to help you decide which priorities you should address. And we recommend at TACE, having looked at a lot of states doing this, don't do any more than 4, and preferably just 2 or 3, so that you can really attend to them and do a good job. It's very tempting to take on all of the issues about disabilities, but you'll be able to make a bigger difference if you spend your time and really set out good advice, good recommendations to the state on fewer. And then the board will be able to deal with those in the same way, with lots more attention and clarity to make it a good result. Okay? So for the setting the priority, we're going to do that this afternoon, as I said, and everyone will be involved in that. We'll need everybody's voice, and you'll have an opportunity to share, and we'll focus in on 2 or 3 priorities for you to attend to. Are there any priorities that need to carry over from last year?
So we addressed all of the priorities from last year. And like I said, the board did take action on that one and another priority at the very beginning of the year. But so we don't need to continue with any of them, but we could.
All right.
Right? We could do next steps, but we don't necessarily need to.
Fair enough. Then we'll be kind of starting with a clean slate this
Yeah,
afternoon.
I am going to bring up a suggested priority that's a next step from a priority we had the year before, the diploma options. And I'm going to bring it up in, during the priority setting, and the board can the panel can decide whether or not. Yeah, but it'll be a next step from a priority 2 years ago.
Thank you. That's good news. That's good to bring to the table. And you as a group can decide whether or not to continue with that or not. So you'll very much have a voice in what's going on. All right. The annual report, we've mentioned it already just a little bit. It's advice. Well, the annual report is out there. It doesn't sound like you do a specific report, just the information gets put on the website as an annual report, and that's fine. Some states do a very formal document and use it as a, see, we're an advisory panel. These are the things that we can do, and sometimes it helps get nominations for next year. It's a bit of an advertising tool. Sometimes the states have to, by requirement of their own state, provide a written report to give to the governor because they did the appointing and that sort of thing. So there's not a right way or a wrong way to do it. There's just examples out there. And when I show you that website at the end of the presentation, that's a way that you can see what some of the other states' annual reports look like. If you like how you're doing it, keep doing it. If you don't, then there's some options for change. And this isn't in regulation that you have to do an annual report, but it's best practice. Some states at the state level require that the annual reports get put together. They should be meaningful and useful. Let's put it, they can be meaningful and useful. We'll see what needs to happen. And where you don't do one this way, I'm not going to go through the suggested content that we have on here, but the biggest thing that it needs to do is share the advice and the guidance that you come up with for the state so that you can show we did this work last year. Whether or not it was taken is not the issue. It's that you came up with the advice and provided it. All right.
Can I just
Yes, please.
explain how that works in our system? So whenever the panel makes a recommendation using it's not a form, but using the process that's in your packet that Sean has provided for you, I submit it to the board as an agenda item for the next board meeting. So you send me the memorandum and I turn it into either a discussion, a consent calendar item, or an action item for the board. And I discuss that with Chair Huntsman. He's the chair of the State Board of Education. If he wants that to be a consent calendar item, if he wants it to be a discussion item, if he wants it to be an action item. And so once he makes that determination, I submit it to the board secretary. And then, so right the month after our panel meeting, it goes to the Board of Education. That's the process we use. So it's very immediate.
It's very immediate, and certainly compared to a lot of other states, it's very quick to get to a decision-making body. So well done. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, if you want to adjust it, do, but regardless, your advice is getting where it needs to go, whether or not you've got an annual report, and that's what's really important. All right. We're going to spend a little time talking about this section in here because you are a federally mandated agency to Useap, the federal agency, about how they're going to do things in the state to comply with the law. It's a long-range plan. It's a 6-year plan, in fact. And then every year they need to submit an update on how they're doing on it, which is the annual performance report. And it's a lot of data that has to be gathered and sent to the feds. It's sent in February of every year. We put in here that it's high stakes, but which it is. Your funding depends on it. The feds have never denied anyone funding, but it's in the law that they could if the state isn't doing a good job with using the funds to help support the kids with disabilities. And it provides what is that grade that I told you about, the level of determination. So after that annual performance report is submitted, then the feds give you a grade. Hang on. There we go. These are the possibilities. Meets requirements. It's like getting an A where they say you met all the requirements of the law. Needs assistance is where you need a little bit of help, but you're doing a pretty good job for the most part. Needs intervention means you've got some problems and you really need to fix it. And at this point, the feds will start to say, and here's what you need to do specifically to do it. They start to become prescriptive and say you have to access this help or you have to do these things in order to fix the problems. And the final one is needs substantial intervention. And to my knowledge, no state has ever gotten needs substantial intervention because the feds don't want to go there. I think there's several states that could be there, but they haven't done it. And instead what they've been doing, they give you a NA for needs assistance or an NI for needs intervention. And if you get in needs intervention for more than 1 year, they say NI2 or NI3. And there's one state that's NI7 this year that without ever going into needs substantial intervention. And I'm not sure their rationale behind that, but that's how it is at this point. So what was Utah's level of determination in July?
Needs assistance.
Needs assistance. Can you explain just a little bit about why?
Yeah, so we've been needs assistance for 4 years now. Previous to that, for the 6 years previous to that, we were meets requirements. So the reason that we were in needs assistance is several-fold, one of which is state law changed so that parents get to choose if their students are going to take a statewide assessment or if they're going to opt out of a statewide assessment. And the federal government requires that 95% of students with disabilities participate in the statewide assessment. And because of our state law about the ability for parents to opt out, we do not meet that 95% criteria. And so we're below that criteria, so we don't meet that target. Further, we don't meet the target for proficiency for English language arts and for math, and haven't met the proficiency targets for several years. In fact, last year we actually regressed. The statewide assessment results were just released last week. I don't have the results for students with disabilities yet, but for the state of Utah, English language arts went up a point, 1 percentage point, and math stayed the same. The proficiency rate in math is the same, which is good because 2 years ago, math went down. So at least the state didn't regress. We also don't meet the targets in some of our preschool indicators, which is kind of a sore spot for us in the state, because even though we don't meet the targets, our performance is significantly higher than many other states. But because we had a really high baseline, and you have to move up from baseline, our target is really high, and we haven't ever been able to move up from baseline. Well, significantly. We have moved up, but not significantly. So we don't meet the preschool targets. The two targets that are most concerning to me as the state special education director are our transition plan target. We are required by Useap to have 100% compliant transition plans for students that post-secondary transition plans. So for students that are 14 years and older. And we do not have 100%. We don't even meet the 95% of significantly proficient. But that's, in my opinion, that's something that we as a state can much simpler, much easier do than increasing the number of parents who choose not to opt out, or increasing ELA or math proficiency by providing professional learning to teachers so that they write compliant proficient transition plans. Thank you. We can meet that target. That's low-hanging fruit. So that's one of the things at the state that we're really focusing on. The other thing that we are focusing on is, one of the indicators is parent participation, meaningful parent participation in the special education process. And we did not meet the target for meaningful parent participation last year. We survey half of our LEAs, the parents, a sample of parents in half of our LEAs every other year. So we established baseline on one half of our LEAs, and then we surveyed the other half of our LEAs the next year, and they didn't do as well. So we will be surveying this half of LEAs again, and be able to see if that half of LEAs actually met target and made improvements. And that'll give us really good data about, is it this group of LEAs that we need to work with? Is there some weird thing going on with the data? We only have, for parent participation, we only have 2 years of data because we reset our target 2 years ago. So, but whether or not there's anything weird going on with the data, meaningful parent participation is a fundamental principle of the IDEA. It's why you're at the table. That's why we have a state advisory panel. So even if we met target, we should be working on that. We should be improving meaningful parent participation in the process, because the process exists for families and students and parents. That's why the whole process exists. So we didn't meet target, and that's disappointing, because that's the one thing we should really be doing right, because that's the fundamental reason that IDEA exists. So that is why we're in needs assistance.
Very good, and thank you. That's a good explanation. My question, are you not getting enough responses to the parent survey, or is the survey showing that there is not good involvement?
Oh, great question. So we do meet the target in number of parents participating in the survey. We work very hard at that.
Good. Okay, excellent. So really the questions then will be for you to decide if you want one of your priorities to be this, how can we improve parent participation in the process so that when they do answer the survey, they can say, yep, I'm in, I'm involved, and I like what's going on. There are other states that have to work on participation in the survey. They have very low response rates to it, but it sounds like you've got that figured out here in Utah, and good for you. So that's something to consider for a priority this afternoon if you need to. Now, I don't have any slides about this, but I think it's something you're going to hear. Look at your little card right there and go to the Part B side and look at number 17. We mentioned this at the beginning. The State Systemic Improvement Plan. The State Systemic Improvement Plan is a comprehensive, multi-year plan that focuses on improving results for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. And that language comes right out of the law. The state has to submit, as part of their annual performance report, what their state systemic improvement plan is. And the state picks an area that they really want to work in. And within this SSIP is something called a SIMR, or a State Identified Measurable Result. The feds, when they looked at this, and I can't speak for their rationale for it, but I think they said, well, the scope is too big. We can't ask them to really drill down so specifically on everything. Let's have them pick one thing to really work on and show us that they're getting results about it. Remember that I talked about how they want to see that it's doing any good, not just that it's there, but if it's having a good effect. That's what this State Systemic Improvement Plan and the Identified Measurable Result is about. Now, the State Systemic Improvement Plan in Utah is about literacy. No? Math. The math, that's right. Sorry.
5 math states.
I'm mixing up my states again. Math. And that State Identified Measurable Result is about math. And that's why Leah could say, we stayed the same in math, we regressed 2 years ago, this is how where we're at now. All of those things have to be submitted really specifically, and it requires so much work to pull the data in about all of that from all of the school districts and charter schools in the state to be able to provide that information. Yes, please.
I just had a question. Is the ESSEP the same for Part B and C, or does this group have, the upper level have its own? Because I've worked on the other, and I just wasn't sure where they overlapped, or they're the same, or
They don't overlap.
They don't.
they don't. Okay.
Yeah, they're different parts of the law, and they could overlap if you chose to work on them that way. I don't know of any states off the top of my head that do, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was one or two out there, because I know some states that have the transition from Part C to Part B as their area of that they chose to improve on. But for your state, and anytime you have it when the Part C program, that early childhood program, is not in the same agency as the Part B program, it's more complicated to do that sort of thing. It requires a lot of collaboration. And in fact, you brought up just a great thing. The next thing we're going to talk about is partnering with Part C. I don't know at what level that happens in Utah, but I just want to point out that there are a lot of similarities between the agencies. For Part C, you're covering children age 0 to 2, and they have an interagency coordinating council, which is exactly like you are, only dealing with that smaller age. Tends to be smaller because there's how many fewer kids that are age 0 to 2 compared to the entire age range of schools, but they have the same requirement in terms of stakeholders of who needs to be at the table, a variety of people involved, and to provide advice to their lead agency. For Utah, that's the Department of Health, to improve services and do a good job. Then there's this area called Section 619, which is a specific line in the law that has to do with preschool age kids, knowing that some of them may be being served under Part C, some under Part B, but it's officially a Part B responsibility. It's Leah's group's responsibility, and she's got a person, Melissa, I believe, right there, who that's her job, is to take care of the kids in that space. And she's leaving, I understand, and going to go do something else. Darn it. But it's a big deal, that little crossover between Part C and Part B. It can be complicated. Getting the transition across is a challenge. Yes?
So, to go along with her question, the definition they've got under the SIP on both sides is the same. So is that, I mean, should the one side say birth to 2 years and the other side say school-age children, or they're two different SIP reports?
Yes. Yeah, they're two separate, and I'm not sure why it doesn't say that specifically under Part C.
Because they originate from two separate parts of the law, and the part of the law related to Part C only ever talks about 0 through 2. And the part of the law, Part B, only ever talks about 3 through 21. So
should that be reflected on this when it's saying these are the Part C indicators and the Part B indicators?
it would probably be helpful to say, to put the age ranges there for people who aren't familiar with it.
It's true. But in the law right now,
Yeah.
in the regulations right now, it's not differentiated. Anyway, you've got the two groups doing very similar things just for a different age range. And it's all about the kids in one big group. So you may want to consider, if you don't at all, maybe a way to connect with that. You've got a good person on the panel right now that could help with some of the connections. And remember, this is just best practice. This is how you can do it, not necessarily what you have to do. And there are some ways to do it. You can consider a joint annual report where you do yours a little differently on the website. It would give you the perspective of 0 to 2 all the way through. But some good practice that we've seen in other states of bringing the two groups together is try to meet together once annually. It would require a bit of orchestration, but you're talking about kids with disabilities, 0 to the top. You'd have maybe some good conversation. There are SPP indicators on this card that are the same for Part C as they are for Part B. But we're going to just run through a few things and just as a reminder and talk a little bit at the end, and then we'll be done. And lunch smells really good, doesn't it? All right, so here's some good practices. Have a close relationship with your state director. It looks to me like Utah's already got that figured out. You've got a good person here. You've got a good relationship. She's able to explain things clearly and well. Keep that going. Do an orientation, which is what you've done today. Keep in mind the advisory versus advocacy component of this. You're here to provide advice to the state, not to say we have got to take care of this in this state and we need to do a better job and we need to do it now. That's not what this panel's for. You're here to come together to provide advice to the state. And remember that what you're doing is meaningful work. Have it be what matters. I was in a state a couple of years ago, and the panel there is huge. It has over 50 people on it. It's enormous, and it's really a big job to keep them, to have the group work together. But we looked at their priorities at the end of the year, and they had a standing committee on membership. They had a standing committee on the bylaws. They had a standing committee on other things that have to do with the panel. And by the time they wrote their recommendations for the end of the year, 6 of the 8 recommendations they had were about the panel. So they had a panel about the panel. And it wasn't doing them any good in the state. And so the state asked us to come in and try and help shift that way. Have it be meaningful. If you keep the main thing, and remember that you're talking about the kids, then the real specific how the panel runs isn't as important as the advice that you come up with to give to the state. Okay? Something to think about. Do the priority setting. We'll do that this afternoon. And then just another good practice is to have ongoing collaboration between your leadership team and the state. Some good practices, we mentioned these already. Try and connect with Part C. Support what the state is doing around this state improvement plan, this number indicator 17. It's a lot of work for them, and you can help with it. Try and meet at least 4 times a year. Sounds like you've got that part underway. little in-service about confidentiality that we mentioned, an awareness brochure. Sometimes recruitment into panels is really hard to get people to fill all of those stakeholder groups. Looks like you've done a great job. If that starts to be a problem, you may want to put together a brochure or something about what the panel is, what it's done, what good effect it is, and it will help you keep more people on the panel. We had this slide before at the beginning, but this is really what's going to help you as an individual do a good job. Know the bylaws, attend the meetings, don't find reasons not to come, find reasons to get here and participate in what's going on. Do your homework beforehand, make sure you're representing your stakeholder group, and that includes a great deal of homework as well. Come with your stakeholder group's voice, the things that they're concerned about. Make sure you actively participate when you're here. You'll get a chance. Everyone's going to participate in the priority setting activity this afternoon, and then work as a part of a team. This website is sponsored by Useap, but it's got state people and technical assistance provider people participating in it. It's a really good website, and it's in that primer in your packet, so you don't need to worry about keeping track of the address. It's one of the flyers at the back of the panel. It's a really good resource if you're going, I don't know what to do, or let me see what some other state does, or how could we do this better? There are good examples of what other states do. There's some real clear information about effective practices for panels, and then they have a webinar 3 or 4 times a year that you're all welcome to participate. I would recommend that the chair check out those webinars. The next one's next week, or a week in 10 days. Did you want to say something, Leah?
So when those webinars come up, Emily always sends that information to everyone so that as soon as we know about it, we forward that information to you. So if you want to participate, you can take that opportunity.
Yeah, sounds good. They can be really helpful, and a lot of times they'll divide the meeting between the Interagency Coordinating Council and the State Advisory Panel, and they will bring a state in to say, here's how we do it about a particular thing. And that can be really helpful information as well to help you do a better job of your panel work here in the state. Any questions? I'm happy to show that, or we can bring it up on Leah's computer afterward if you want, to show you what the possibilities are there. Okay? All right, let me get...
Where is that website in the material?
It's in the primer, in that stapled packet. No, not that one. No,
not that one.
no, hang on. I'll show you. We've got time.
So I just clicked on it. So this is what the website looks like.
That's right. That's right. And it's got archived
this one
webinars.
right here, right?
This one, yes. It's the
puzzle.
Yep. No, not the puzzle one. I picked up the wrong book. Sorry. That one. It's in there.
It's in here.
Yeah. It's one of the last pages in it. There's a flyer. The very last page has that website on it. Yeah. Okay. And it hasn't got the new webinar on here yet. I'll find out why. But I do know that it's on the 27th because I happen to be on the committee to run this thing. I'll find out what they're doing. Anyway, there's news files, that button on the far right, state resources.
No, it's not on their calendar yet either.
I'll find out what's going on with it. Click on state resources, Leah, over on the far right. There you go. It's got Part C and Part B and examples of things about how states do things, what committees they have, how they do public outreach, public input. There's just a lot of good resources here about what the possibilities are if you feel like you need to change the direction of what you're doing at all. Okay? All right. Sounds good. If you'd go back to the presentation. There we go. All right, we're almost done. I lived in the Middle East for quite a few years while I was growing up and really got to appreciate a Bedouin caravan point of view as I did that. And there's this African proverb that's great that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that applies to this group. You as an individual are going to be able to just do so much. If you do this as a panel, as it relates to kids with disabilities, you're going to be able to have a greater impact. One of you as an individual probably couldn't get to the board and have a policy change like you had last year, as you did because you worked on this together. The challenge with this is it's not going to happen as fast as what it might otherwise, but good change sometimes takes a long time in order to have a good effect. Keep in mind, however, that your ideas as an individual here in this panel will make a difference, that you'll be able to bring a good voice to what's going on here by virtue of who you are and why you're here in the stakeholder group that you're here to represent. Are there any questions or comments that you want to make at this point about the panel? Those of you that have been on the panel a long time, do you want to share anything about how it's worked for you, how you feel like it's done? Who's been on the panel longer than 3 years? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like it's a good thing? Like it's making a difference? Some of you 3-year folks? No? Here, we got one person who's Tanya's going to share.
I've been on the panel for a very long time because I've just been in my position for a while. It's just been really useful for me, especially to help me learn more about the process and how special education services should work so that we can advocate for children in foster care. Over 40% of our kids qualify for special ed services. So,
wow.
So it's really relevant to our kids. And you make the most valuable thing for me has been the associations and the connections that I formed here in this group.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Any of the other long-termers want to say anything? Yes.
The connections and the networking through the meeting the various the demographic that's represented here, and we are able to really advocate for and represent our demographic as a teacher, as parents, as different organizations, being the representatives to help is a great opportunity for each of us. So it's
Gives
great.
a good voice, doesn't it? Yeah. Gina.
Before I make my comment, I just wanted to introduce Mallory Poole. That was Mallory. She was didn't get a chance to introduce herself, but for those of you who are new, Mallory was our chair last year, and so I just wanted to recognize her and thank her for her role as chair last year. And then I wanted to introduce Summer, who joined us a few minutes ago, and oh, yep. And so actually, before I make comment on that, Summer, can you introduce themselves and tell them who your stakeholder group is? And then Maggie, can you grab a microphone and introduce yourself too?
Okay, my name's Summer again, and I'm late. I teach up at Utah State University, so I had a class this morning I taught and then jumped in the car and came down here. I'm future special ed teachers, which is nice. But my stakeholder group is individuals or a parent of a student with disabilities. I have a daughter with learning disabilities who is in middle school now and was really interested in being a part of this group, both with more passionately about my role as a mother and as a friend, and also because of the knowledge that I have in special education.
Sorry, I'll stand up since otherwise I don't know if you can see me. My name is Maggie Crockett. I'm faculty up at the University of Utah in the Department of Special Education, so I represent institutions of higher education.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your introductions. And as far as, I have appreciated the opportunity I've had to be on the panel because I've been able to give feedback on issues that impact my son personally and the children of a lot of my friends. And I live I don't know if I live in Tooele, so I don't know if I'm a rural area or if I'm an urban area. I'm not as rural as Amy is, but Tooele is also not Salt Lake and stuff. So I like getting the different perspectives from the different people. And also on a professional note, I've learned a lot that's helped me take it into my classrooms, and also helped the parents, help my parents be involved and give them a voice in their students' education.
Well done and perfect. Well, thank you for being willing to share that. I hope all of you that are new end up having the same sort of experience that's really positive. You heard Leah when she was explaining about the State Systemic Improvement Plan, which is a very large level federal initiative. She said, it's about the kids. It's about the families. That's why we're here. It's what we're doing. If you'll keep that in mind, as she has demonstrated, that the work of the panel is going to be great. You're going to make a big difference. You're going to be able to really have some positive effect for kids with disabilities in the state. We want to thank you for being here, and thank you for paying close attention. It's a lot of time to just sit and listen. I know it. I imagine you're sick of listening to my voice. I don't blame you a bit. And we've got Emily, I'm going to leave it over to you about what needs to happen next. We're done.
And on the agenda, the first half an hour of lunch is just eating and visiting and stuff. And so we're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So it's 11:45 now. So at 12:15, we can continue eating, but we'll turn to the working part of the agenda. If you get a chance, those of you who were at the last meeting, get a chance to take a look at the minutes to see if we can approve the minutes. Obviously, those of you who are new to the panel wouldn't know if these minutes are accurate or not. So those of you who were at the last meeting, review the minutes so that we can approve that. That's one of the items on the agenda when we get back to the working part. So.
Look, you get to own your computer again.
Are you going to meet it this afternoon? Are you going to?
No,
Okay.
No, it'll all be real interactive,
Right,
and
I'll
I'll just
just
stick you long.
Good.
All right. Okay, I'd like to get everyone's attention. It's 12:15 now, and we need to go to the working part of our lunch. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from February 28th. So I know that Summer found one thing that we need to correct. Which page was it on again?
It was at the very back, under the one a statement that I made, Summer Gun. Lots of it's ATP, Alternative Teacher Prep.
Okay, so
teachers.
Okay, so AP.
There's so many acronyms for that,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
Okay, so on page 8, midway down, Summer Gun, lots of our ATPs. Okay, were there any other corrections? Okay, what?
Page 2.
Okay.
Page 2 under my comments. Should be National PTA Board in hopes of being approved. Instead of
Okay, being approved, okay.
Instead of bring.
Okay, was there anything else anybody else found? Page 2, up the first bullet point, the end of the first bullet point. Okay, did anybody else find anything, or do we need like another 5 minutes to look through it? Okay, let me refer to our parliamentary rules. So, okay, so we need to. I'm not sure. Okay, so we need to have, does anyone have a motion to regarding approving the minutes? Okay, so Emma and Summer seconds it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the minutes have been approved. Okay, the next thing, I'm going to turn a second over to Summer for public comment that she was unable to make earlier. So, Summer.
I just wanted to make the panel aware, the Division of Early Childhood, a division of the Council for Exceptional Children, which is an advocacy group for families and individuals with disabilities, and the Division of Early Childhood is the one that advocates for birth to 5. They are trying to reignite their Utah chapter, and they'll be meeting on Wednesday. Oh, I didn't write that one down. Pull it up on my calendar. The 26th. Wednesday the 26th at 4:30 at the Jordan Valley School. I'm not sure what room within the Jordan Valley School, but that's where it is. And if you have questions, you can direct those to Marla Neff at usu.edu. That's MARLA.NEF. But it's for both educators and families, the Division of Early Childhood. And if you have any questions, you can catch me.
The next item on our agenda is to elect a chair-elect who will serve as a chair-elect for this year on the panel, and then next year will become the chair of the panel for next year. And so I'd like to open the floor for nominations. If anyone has a nomination for that position, I will go ahead and I'll make a nomination, and then somebody else can nominate. I would like to nominate Karen Condor for the position of chair-elect. Karen has been on the panel for 3 years and is starting her 4th year on the panel, and she's been at all the meetings and she's been very involved in participating, and so that's who I would like to nominate. Are there any other nominations? Do we need to second a nomination like that?
Yeah, you need.
I need a second. That's right. Is there a second to nominate? Okay, so Mallory seconds the nomination. Thank you, Mallory. Okay, are there any other nominations for chair-elect? Okay, I don't see any other nominations, so those in favor of Karen Condor as serving as the chair-elect, please indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so it's unanimous. So Karen, welcome to be chair-elect.
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate it. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is let's do the rules update thing first, and then. So I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
So hopefully, well, those of you who were on the panel last year know that the legislature made changes to the special education code of Utah law in their recent legislative session. One of the things that they did was increase the age for students to be able to be eligible for special education services in Utah. They can finish the school year in which they turn 21, and if they start a school year at 21, they can actually keep going till 22. And the wording is you have to be 21 after July 1st to continue for another school year. It's kind of how it works. But anyway, that was one of the changes. There were a couple other changes. So we have to update the rules in response to the update to statute. So we've put together a committee to update the special education rules. So again, this is what we're talking about here, okay, the special education rules. We have LEA directors. We have an attorney who's going to be serving on the committee, and we would like to have at least one parent. And if from Useap, if a teacher from Useap could be released to participate, there will be 3 or 4 meetings of probably 3 or 4 hours each. We recognize that having teachers out of the classroom is not ideal. Superintendent Dixon is actually very opposed to having teachers out of the classroom unless it's absolutely required. So if you're the kind of teacher that doesn't have a classroom and would be interested in participating, we would like to have a teacher from the panel and a parent from the panel. If you are a teacher that has a classroom, Superintendent Dixon would prefer that you didn't participate. She doesn't want teachers out of classrooms as much as possible. And there's research behind that reasoning. The less instructional time that students have, the poorer they fare on end-of-level assessments. So as a building, we are really trying to reduce the amount of time that classroom teachers are away from their students. So that's what we're looking for. Like I said, it'll probably be 3 or 4 meetings of 3 or 4 hours each. And we would also be very happy to have a representative from higher education if Maggie or Summer is interested and would be available and could be released. So we'd be happy to have 3 people if we could get you, but it would be wonderful.
Ask a question. What's the time frame that you plan to do the review?
So Natay Dearden, our dispute resolution specialist, is going to facilitate the process, and she will send a doodle poll next week to get the meeting started within the next couple weeks. I have to report to the legislature, to the education committee in November about the process. I doubt we would be able to get it done just because of people's schedules by November. If we could, that'd be awesome, but we're really looking at, I'm really hoping that we could present to the board, the board law and licensing committee in December, and then the full board would approve the recommendations in January, so that then I could report to the legislature when they begin the legislative session on those changes in January. So thank you for asking that question.
I'd be happy to be involved in any of those 3 capacities, whichever one I best fit.
Is there anyone who wants to serve on that rules committee as representing the parent stakeholder group? Okay. All right.
We have a hand down at the end.
Okay, so Gina? Thank you, Gina. Okay, and our teachers, are you guys in a classroom? Okay. Now, I realize on the panel, I'm here representing parents of students with disabilities, but I'm also a teacher and I don't have a classroom. So if you'd like me to be on the rules committee, I probably can, because I don't have a classroom.
If your LEA is willing to release
Okay,
you,
I
we
will.
would be happy to have you.
I will talk to my principal and let you know. All right. All right. Thank you. And
so Gina, Summer, possibly Janelle, you'll get back with me. Natay Dearden will be sending. I'll give her your contact information, and you'll get an email from her with the doodle poll to set up the meetings. Okay. Thank you. Please.
For me to also be on the committee as well? Or
Sure. Yeah.
I can join. I can help as a teacher. I'm a special director, but
We have special ed directors represented already. So thank you, Allison.
all right. The next thing on our agenda is a few months ago, Leah and a group went to Finland, and I asked her to share with us what she learned about the purpose of the visit and what she learned there.
Thank you. So I had a really unique opportunity. The state of Utah got a grant from the Council of Chief State School Officers. So that's the Association for State Superintendents. Not all states call their superintendent a superintendent. So the organization is called the Council of Chief State School Officers, whoever that might be. Utah got a grant from them to, let's see, it's been 3 years ago, to examine our educator preparation processes in preparation for the changes that we knew were coming, that we were going to be able to make to the licensing structure in Utah, because we've been working on updating educator licensing for about that amount of time. So we applied to CCSSO for a grant. That grant has helped us to be able to do the research that we have presented to you from the Utah Education Policy Center that Dr. Andrea Rohrer has been responsible for, about why do teachers leave, why do they move between LEAs, within LEAs, why do they stay, why do they come back. That research that I presented, if you've been on the panel for a while, last year, that research was paid for by this grant. So the way their education system works, you take the test in your 9th grade year, and if it's determined that you want to continue on to secondary school, which is very similar to a junior college in America, you continue on that path and you do a couple more years of what we would consider liberal arts, kind of the general education that we receive when we get a bachelor's degree, those types of courses, and then you apply to the educator preparation program, and they really only have one program in the state because it's centralized, or in the country because they're centralized like a state, and you can go to different locations, but it's really only one program. And then you start what we would consider your bachelor's degree and master's degree, but because they have already done all of the general education that we kind of think of, they spend 5 years learning to be teachers. Now that's very different than our system because we spend 2 years learning to be teachers. We spend 2 years doing general education, which a lot of it in the Finnish system, their philosophy is a lot of that liberal arts requirements that we have in the States, they do in their secondary school. So why do you have to do it again? That's kind of their philosophy. If you take calculus in high school, why do you have to take calculus again when you get into college? If you are learning French in high school, why do you have to take the course requirement to learn a language when you get to college? So all of that, not all, the majority of that general education kind of stuff that we do in our first 2 years of education, they take care of in their high school experience. So they spend 5 years learning to be teachers. And you can't get a license without a master's degree as a teacher. But then once you're a teacher, it's pretty non-regulated. You're good to go. The country has determined that you have the knowledge and skill to be a teacher. You don't have to go back and get relicensed every few years. You don't have to. There's continuing education that's available, but you don't have to turn it in to the country, to get relicensed. They figure they did a good job teaching you, and you're good to go. And the big difference is that from day one of starting that 5-year educator preparation program, you are in classrooms teaching. You're observing, you're co-teaching, which doesn't always meet the same definition that we use of co-teaching here, but you're teaching with the support of a professional teacher, and then you're providing instruction, you're lesson planning, you're providing instruction. So for 5 years, before you're released to a classroom. And how do we do it? We do 16 weeks at the end of your second year in general, right? You do your practicum and then you do your student teaching the last semester of your second year of a 2-year teacher education program.
Even all of your student teaching is in
is independent, right? Not even all of the student teaching is independent. So it's a very different preparation program. The other interesting thing is because it's a socialist, financially, fiscally socialist country, they only have so many spots. They have 8 locations around the country that you can go to teacher education, and they only admit about depending on if it's elementary, secondary. So they have different licenses. They have a kindergarten license, they have an elementary license, and then they have a secondary license. And depending on which program you're going to, they only admit about 20% of the students that apply. It is very competitive. It's one of the most competitive careers that they have in Finland. So they get, we can assume, and they do assume, the cream of the crop into their program, and then they spend 5 years training them and actually working as teachers intensely for 4 of the 5 years. And then they get a license and they're good to go. Allison?
What about special education? Is there a separate additional training that they get in addition to just the teacher education program?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. So for special education, the coursework, you get it in kindergarten or you get it in elementary or get it in secondary. Those are the same, like different tracks, age tracks, but the coursework is of special education oriented. Okay, so thank you for asking that question. So yes, they do have special education teachers. They have licensed special education teachers. Okay, so that's one difference that's pretty significant. Second difference, pretty significant, is the way that they provide special education services. They have a countrywide multi-tiered system of supports. They provide MTSS countrywide. The whole system has core instruction, has tier 2 interventions and supports, in some cases tier 3, and then instead of providing special education on top of or at the same time as a tiered system, if any of you have seen some really old thought process related to, we consider old in America, but thought process related to MTSS where there's like a 4th tier and the 4th tier is special education, that's really how their system works. Most of the students who the special education teachers work with are in special schools. So special education teachers, the training that they get is to work with students who have more significant disabilities and are provided instruction in special schools. There are tons of students with disabilities in the regular schools, and they get tons of services and supports through their multi-tiered system of supports. They don't necessarily have a special education teacher teaching them because the general education teacher knows how to provide services and supports. The general education teacher knows how to do tier 2, and then they in the secondary school they didn't really have tier 3. So in 3 of the 4 schools we visited, they have interventionists, general education teachers, not special education teachers, who are interventionists who provide tier 3 instruction, which is like, oh, that would be so heavenly, right? But so that's an interesting, different system. So it was really cool. It was beautiful, actually, to see a multi-tiered system of supports working from kindergarten all the way up through their graduation test, which really happens at 9th grade. But so that was an interesting discrepancy or difference between us and them. And then another interesting thing, which the board has already acted on, it was such a powerful idea that the board passed a resolution on Thursday of last week to begin working to possibly make this happen in Utah. Because Finland is a member of the European Union, as one of the requirements of being part of the European Union was to accept a certain number of individuals from other countries every year, right? That's one of the requirements. If you followed the process that Great Britain went to jump ship from the European Union, that was one of the things that they weren't happy with. So Finland, just in the last few years since they joined the European Union, has had individuals from other countries moving in, which they'd never really had before. They're kind of up there, all by themselves. And nobody really goes to Finland. And so they had a pretty homogeneous population. And just in the last few years, their population has gotten considerably more heterogeneous because they have been bringing in up to 6% of individuals from other countries into Finland. Well, obviously, they don't speak Finnish because no one in the world speaks Finnish except the Finns. So as a country, they had this problem of what do we do about all of these individuals moving into our country that don't speak our language, but that need to be able to contribute to our system, because the socialist system relies very heavily on people working for a living so that they pay taxes, right? Because the taxes run the whole system. So as a system, they decided that they would add an extra year of education for students who were coming in who needed to learn Finnish, that would not be included, that would be outside of the whole process of their education. And they financed that. They said, okay, they changed their laws to say, if you come in as a second grader, you get to do an entire year of just learning Finnish. And then you get to do second grade. You don't have to jump into second grade and learn Finnish at the same time. We're going to spend a whole year teaching you Finnish, and then you can go to second grade. If you come in, yeah, it's a different philosophy. If you come in as a ninth grader, you're supposed to be taking the test and moving on. Nope. You get to spend an entire year as a ninth grader, learn Finnish, and then decide if you want to take the test. And if you don't, you can take ninth grade and then take the test. So they in all of their buildings, they have teachers who are trained specifically to teach Finnish as a second language, and that's all the students do. And they, of course, they are included in activities, and they go to PE, and they take art, and the kind of thing that we tend to think about students in a special class. For students with disabilities, they have special classes for students who are learning Finnish, and it's making all the difference because the students learn the language, and then they can use the language to learn content. Right? That's what we want third graders. That's our goal with third grade, right? Learn to read so that you can read to learn. And they're applying that principle to all of these students. And the cool thing is it also applies to expats. So individuals who move into Finland, like Americans, who move into Finland as because their businesses, are there, or because they're American diplomats, or their kids can go to those schools and get an extra year too. So they can learn Finnish if they want to, if their parents want that. They can learn Finnish, and then they can continue with their education. So the board was so impressed. So board Vice Chair Brittany Cummins and board member Laura Belknap were the two board members that attended. They were so impressed that they passed that they voted last week to look at ways to remove barriers in both statute and rule to make it possible, if LEAs want to go that direction, to provide that to students learning English. Now, of course, the financing of that is unreal. Like adding an extra year of financing to the WPU, like adding an extra WPU year, the state can't afford it. We simply cannot afford that. However, what the direction that the board chose to go was, let's remove all the barriers. Let's make sure that there is nothing in statute or rule that would prohibit it, so that if somebody wants to try it and we can figure out how to finance it, that we can try it. So that was a pretty impressive first step. And we went in April, and they did that in September. So, I mean, they talked about it, they thought about it, they reviewed data, and they got right on it. That's really impressive. What we have been doing, so that group of people who went to Finland has been talking about that 5 years of of preparation with embedded clinical practice. It's actually 4 of the 5 years. And the reason is because in the 4th year, if you choose, they will set it up for you to go to another country and learn educator preparation in the other country. So the majority of the educators who are trained in Finland spend a year in another country in an education preparation program, the majority of them in America, but they go all over Europe, and many other programs like America don't have embedded clinical practice in whatever year they take. But they come, many of them come to Pennsylvania. There's a program at the University of Pittsburgh, I think, that does an exchange. There's several programs that across the country that will exchange students so that our students can go to Finland and study for a year, and students from Finland can come here so that they can just see other opportunities for educator prep and different ways to think about instruction and systems. So, but for the other 4 years of that 5-year program, they're doing embedded clinical experiences. So this group of people that I went to Finland with is working on a pilot to embed all the other colleges on campus that provide all the liberal arts types of general education courses have to coordinate to be able to say, if you're going to take biology, you're going to take biology with an embedded clinical practice in it. You're going to take biology for teachers, and you're going to get into biology classrooms in the state. And if you're going to take art history, you're going to take an art history class that is for teachers that gets you into an art history class in a high school somewhere, right? You see, that is a completely different way of providing teacher prep. So, but we have 2 universities that are really thinking about how to do that and are working on getting other universities interested in playing with them to really be able to try it and make it happen. So it was a really interesting experience, very thought-provoking experience, and we've already made change as a result, and we're working on making other change as a result. So you have people who want to ask questions. Are you cool with that, Janelle?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
totally cool with it.
Okay.
Questions too.
This is not about the teacher licensing piece, but when you were in the schools in Finland, in particular the elementary schools, what do they even identify kids with disabilities like we do? Like, do they test them or whatever it is, or do they just run through MTSS unless they need the special school?
So they have a great question. They have student support teams just like we do, like we hope to have, right? Okay, so they have a social worker and a school psychologist and an SLP and an OT that are all on the student support team. And they review every student who isn't making progress. And if the student they suspect the student has a disability, they do a full comprehensive evaluation. So they use the teaming structure that we wish we were using, right? Yeah.
Unless you still got more there. I'm curious with the way that they approach that with kids with disabilities, what their outcomes are on how the kids do coming out of the system, like how successful they are, how they're testing compared to their typical peers, how they're achieving higher education, work, etc.
So their students are the highest achieving students in the world on the test that starts with a P. It's the test that all the kids in Europe take. PISA. Yeah. So, and students with disabilities take the test and are proficient, and some students with disabilities take the test and are not proficient, and there are plenty of students with disabilities who apparently do not take the test. So they couldn't answer that question for us. I can't answer that question for you because they don't have the 95% participation requirement that we have to take the test. You get to choose if you want to take the test to be able to move on to higher education. So, but even if you don't, you get to choose to go on to a vocational school. So if it is a group of students with disabilities who is not taking the test, they have the opportunity to learn a trade, to learn a job, and be employed. Finland has the lowest unemployment rate of the countries that are similar to it financially, like that have the same socialist kind of system. They have the lowest unemployment rate, but socialist countries have a high unemployment rate. So I can't really answer that question because they didn't have data to share. It's a great question. Gina?
I was just curious which schools were interested in piloting these programs. You mentioned that you had 2 schools that you talked to. Can you mention those?
Dixie and UBU. Okay. Except we did just have a hitch. The dean of UBU just moved to USU. And so, the associate dean went with us to Finland as well. But whether or not she will become the dean, we don't know. But Emma?
I'm just curious a little bit about how their child find process works as far as, early childhood, but then also when, the students are a little bit older, who's responsible? Is it a parent referral, or is it a general education teacher who does it, or is it the team that's responsible for finding the kids?
So the team really is responsible. Parents talk to the teachers quite frequently. They have the same kind of process where when a parent drops the student off in the morning, they check in with the teacher, that informal kind of process. They also have parent-teacher conferences like we do. But the student services team really works dreamy. Like we really would want a student services team to work. They review data every single week, the whole building. So they know who's proficient, they know who's not proficient, they know, so-and-so, and they have a very fluid Tier 2 process. They've got kids coming in and out of intervention all the time. Like in math, because our state systemic improvement plan's on math, I was specifically interested in that. They're Tier 2 for math. A student could be included in the services and supports for just 1 unit until they really master that concept. I've talked to you about fraction hell before, right? So they've got fraction hell taken care of because they've got Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports for kids in 3rd grade who are not getting fractions. They just keep providing supports for them. And, some kids don't master it, but certainly a higher rate than ours.
With that, just how did you find the accountability to be as far as making sure that, the students didn't fall through the cracks? Was it just that team who needed to be accountable?
Yeah, that's one of the really interesting things. One of the main words that this delegation would use to describe their system is autonomy. Once a teacher becomes a teacher, the teacher pretty much has free reign. There aren't very many regulations. There isn't a ton of accountability like we think of accountability, like school grades and, that kind of information. That it just doesn't really exist. As a nation, they figure if you got into a program and you got through the program, they trusted you to teach and you could kind of go ahead and do it. And to be really honest, the instruction was no better than in our classrooms. Glenna went with us because she had been part of this team and then she moved, but she was part of the team that got the grant. And so her superintendent released her to come with us. So we sat in classrooms for hours. The instruction was no better in those classrooms, really. But the system is organized the way we want our system to be organized. Teaming actually works. They actually know where their kids are and they provide support when kids aren't proficient. The Tier 1 instruction was no better. Which is interesting because 5 years of embedded clinical practice, what it appears that the difference is they're learning MTSS and they're learning how to implement MTSS. The tier 1 instruction was not better. So, and another thing that I didn't mention about the clinical practice, so this is a fascinating idea. The professors all teach. They one of the educator prep professors is the 4th grade teacher at the international school, and she's the educator prep. So she teaches a class every semester, and is released. She only is in her building with her classroom for 75% of the time, and kids move a lot. The system is really fluid. Kids move a lot. So she teaches a course at the university campus, drives over, teaches 75%, and all of the professors do this. That they all teach kids. And that's one of the ways that they're able to make the embedded clinical experiences work, because she teaches a group of her students how to teach while she's teaching her 4th graders. So they're in her classroom with her. She teaches them in the morning, and then they come with her over to the school and teaches them how to teach with her in the afternoon. So she's a professor and a 4th grade teacher, and they all are. They all work in the school as well. So it's cool, but it's just interesting and different.
I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here at all, but it'd be interesting to see if, as far as, how teachers have this accountability and how classroom teachers, need to do all this. Can the student support teams be, I guess, audited or held accountable or something like that for those students? Because I think sometimes that's where things fall through the cracks, because we're so under-resourced. As far
You mean
as
here, or does it happen there?
Here, is that something we could use going forward here, just to keep those teams accountable? Just throwing that out there.
The first there'd have to be a team.
Yeah.
Kind of a prerequisite, but it's an interesting idea, because our system has lots of regulations, but in Utah, where we're like a local control state, we have so many fewer regulations than many states. And compared to Finland, there were no regulations. It's like they're just kind of and they said this. This was not just our perception. They said this straight up. The population of Finland trusts their teachers. We don't really do that. No, we don't even think of teachers as professionals right now. But interestingly enough, so everybody left, and I have a dear friend in Finland, so I stayed. Just to spend time with my friend. And the day after the delegation left, there was a teacher rally at the Capitol, because there are 8 different or 7 different teachers' unions in Finland, and all of the teachers are underpaid, even though they're highly valued. It's one of the highest valued professions in Finland. They're not really paid any better than us. In fact, the kindergarten teachers, we wouldn't be able to get people to teach kindergarten, because they don't teach a full day, and so their salary is prorated, and so they make about the same. When you translate, you take out the taxes, they make about the same as our teachers do. So there was this huge rally. I was taking pictures of it. They were all complaining about how poorly they're paid, and I was sending those pictures to all of my friends that had just left, the day before, because they don't make any more money than we do as teachers, but they're producing better results, at least on the PISA, if that's the acronym. But the kids in special schools, the students with disabilities in special schools, don't take the test. Right? So we can't really answer that question, that you asked. So there's so many more questions. I have to go back.
Was there any discussion, like some of the contributory problems here are bad egg teachers that just, they have to stay for various layered reasons. So how do they handle if you end up with a bad egg teacher if there's not really any?
They don't have tenure like we do, but they don't, we asked that question specifically, and once you get your license, you have the license forever unless, I mean, you like break a law or something. They do have professional practices, like we have professional practices, but their process to become a teacher and to make it through 5 years is so rigorous. They don't believe that they really have bad egg teachers. But I'm going to tell you straight up, their tier 1 was not better than our tier 1. Their general, for those of you who aren't teachers, their absolutely everyday regular instruction was not better. Amy?
With them having the schools for students with more significant disabilities, I have kind of a couple questions about that. Do they have a percentage of students that end up in that school? Because I'm kind of thinking of least restrictive environment and inclusion. And were there barriers to staying in the other school, such as medical needs, wheelchairs, those kind of things that we try to integrate and accommodate?
So those students that didn't have cognitive types of disabilities were included. They have wraparound social services as well. So we interviewed the director of the area of the schools, the social services director for the area of those schools. She knew every one of the students in the special school and their families by name, because they provide what we think of as wraparound services. It's their services are more integrated. So those students who have behavior challenges, the students with significant cognitive disabilities that might need other services, their system is much more coordinated than ours. It's dreamy. It's like, oh, really? We could do that? Yeah. If you paid 65% taxes, maybe you can do that. Maybe.
Did the support services, were they significantly more time invested into those? Because that's a large struggle we have with the support services. There's just not enough people in our
Yes.
school.
They had significantly higher FTE than we do. Like every single school has a social worker and a school psychologist and an SLP and an OT. PTs, yes, all the time, full time. PTs, I didn't notice they had at every school, but they had access. But there was an OT in every school. Yeah, dreamy, I'm telling you. But I still think it's fascinating. Glenna and I are actually presenting at a national meeting next month about this, because we can't get over the fact that their core instruction was just not better. Because we spend so much time and energy telling teachers, we've got to improve core instruction, we've got to improve core instruction.
Collaboration.
But we also you have to temper that, because not everybody's taken the test, right? So their test scores are the highest in the country, but they can't account for who is taking the test and who isn't taking the test. So if we could account for that, maybe they wouldn't look so great, right? I mean, so you can't get too excited, because we don't have all the data to be able to make that determination.
So you guys focus specifically on teacher education. What does the education look like for the counselors and the OTs and the speech therapists? Like, what does that look like?
I can't speak to that, because we only visited the teacher prep program. I did ask some questions about school psychology, just because that's what I do, right? And their school psychology preparation seems very similar to ours. So for school psychology, it seemed very similar, but I can't speak to the other ones. I took way more time than you gave me, Janelle.
That's totally fine. It was very interesting. Very interesting. I appreciate the report, and it sounds like, there's a lot of things we can't compare because not everybody takes the test, but it's very interesting. I'd like to see if we can apply some of that stuff here. But So thank you for that report. I appreciate it. Okay, looking ahead at the agenda, the next thing on the agenda is the community organization updates. So first is disability. Well, she just stepped out, so I'll come back to her. And then Tanya got called back to the office, but let me pull up my email. So let me pull up my email. Oh, that's right. This is, okay. Let me pull it up on my phone. I can do it. I just have to get in the right email thing. Okay. So here it is. All right. So Tanya, this is her report. Like I said, she got called back to her office, but she emailed her update. She wanted to give us an update about DCFS. The structure of the DCFS state office has been slightly reorganized. Tanya's position will now be directly reporting to the Deputy Director of Daily Operations and Stakeholder Relations. She will be the liaison appointed specifically to address education-related issues for DCFS. In February 2018, a federal law called the Family First Prevention Services Act was passed, which will have an enormous impact on child welfare services and how we provide services. She said this is a watershed legislation. There are many parts to the act, but it's mostly focused on preventing children from entering foster care by allowing more federal funding to be used for mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and in-home parenting skill training. It also seeks to improve the well-being of children already in foster care by incentivizing states to reduce placement of children in congregate care. The reason that this is important for education and Useap to know is that it means that ultimately less youth will be in residential treatment centers, and those that are there will be there for less time. As many of our students, our kids qualify for special education services, this means that it's important to be aware of these kids, that these kids will need a spectrum of services available to them within districts. The Department of Human Services is working on building up day treatment options and school-based mental health services to assist. The DHS is spending a considerable amount of time and energy on the implementation of the Family First Act, and the target is to have it implemented by October 2019. We are also working with the USBE to help school understand acceptable standards around sharing information between the schools and DCFS, as well as other DHS agencies. Okay, so that is Tanya's update from the Division of Child and Family Services, and that will be in our minutes and stuff, so you'll be able to look over it. And there's some things. We did address youth in custody as a priority a couple of years ago, but with the changing legislation, when they get more information, we might want to keep that in mind for future priorities as this new law gets enacted. Okay. Juvenile Justice Services, Michelle?
I don't have a ton today. I do know our director, Susan Burke, has put she'll be retiring as of November 1st. So maybe I'll have an update next time we meet.
All right.
What's going on.
Yeah. And Mallory, do you have anything from the Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities?
Yes, just they have a reception every year to meet your legislators on the Hill. That's going to be January 31st, 2019. And you can spread the word for that, as well as there's many conferences that are coming up, and they have a website that you can look at where their agendas are posted publicly. But one of the pieces of legislation that to be aware of is the non-binding opinion for question 1. This adds 10 cents to increase the gas tax to fund schools and local roads. And so if you're in favor of that, you're supposed to vote yes, to be aware of that.
Okay. Thank you, Mallory. Okay, the next is Part C, Early Intervention. Melissa?
So I'm sharing today, I'm just showing a tool that USBE has been... Can you get a mic? Yeah, thanks, Emily.
Okay, I'm just sharing a tool that USBE has been working on developing electronically for our LEAs. A few years ago, Canyons, Alpine, Nebo, and Jordan got together and just reviewed standardized assessments, developmental checklist, and they developed what they called the developmental observation tool, the DOT. It was a paper version. So last year, Betsy Sutherland headed up to create this online. And so we've been working with the MDSC, some online developers, to have this available to our LEAs to use for ongoing assessments. So we like to see it done 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, mid-year, end of year, to inform instruction. And this is actually a parent report that can be created. I gave you all black and white versions, but we have color versions based on when they actually observe the skills. So if they're doing it beginning of the year, they do like a light blue. Middle of the year is a medium blue. End of the year is a dark blue. And it's just a nice report to share with parents to see where their child is, what skills they may be missing, where their strengths are. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. We're still working on a few things, ironing out some details, but hopefully it's nice as the child transitions onto kindergarten too. It's like here's what we've been working on during their preschool. It could also transfer with them in states. So if a child moves from Jordan over to Alpine, they could just take this with them, the information. So anyway.
Thank you. Okay, Utah Parent Center, Amy.
Sorry, my computer froze or closed. Okay, I'm going to pass this out, but not really talk about it. So have a look at it, and it kind of speaks for itself. So we do have a change in leadership. We have hired Joey Hanna as our new executive director. She's coming from the Utah Division of Services for People with Disabilities in the Utah Human Services. And we have a parent-to-parent model where we all have students or children with disabilities, and she does as well. So she'll bring in her personal and professional experience. Helen Post is retiring after 30 years. This is an invitation to her open house, and I have a lot of them. So if you want more than one to give to people, you can do that or just pass them around. So you're welcome to come to that. And under her leadership, we've helped thousands of families, and we're going to miss her. We just had a very successful fundraiser. We are trying to reach out to more families. We know there's a lot of families we don't help yet. So that's with our fundraising, we're trying to expand that. We have workshops coming up, but there's going to be a lot more added within the coming weeks to months. So that's something you can go check for families if they want them. We do have a least restrictive behavior interventions webinar on September 18th, and we're trying to look at reaching more people digitally because people are coming out less and less. And then we have a Parents as Partners in Sandy on September 18th, and Dealing with Anxiety in Spanish Fork on September 20th. So we have those coming up, but definitely we'll have a lot more on there shortly for that. That's it.
Thank you, Amy. Disability Law Center, is there anything you want to, Michelle, anything you want to update us on? Okay, thank you. And Deanne had some flyers about a conference that's coming up in October. So, yeah, just...
If you're interested, you can just come get one. But it's Rick Lavoie is coming to speak as part of the Utah Assistive Technology Team Conference. But we have a special session, just 1:30 to 3:30. So if parents or people want to just come and listen to him or they can do the whole conference if they want to, but it's free. And so if you're interested, that's coming up.
All right. Yep. I apologize, Karen. I forgot. I overlooked PTA. So, Karen, PTA.
Okay, so we worked with the National PTA Resolution Committee and presented the resolution that the Special Needs Committee came up with. So we presented that at the national conference in June, and they approved it 470 to 19. So that was really exciting. And so now that is on the National PTA website as one of their positions, and they can use that when they're advocating with Congress or whoever. We also have a little bit different version on the Utah PTA website, but people are welcome to use either one of those. Those are public documents. I've had people ask if they can take them to IEP meetings. Just if anybody wants to help us spread the word that we think we should have higher expectations for students with special needs. I've also been contacted by people from Washington, Delaware, and Ohio that are interested in doing something like that too. So that's been really exciting. Another thing, on the October 16th, we have our PTA Advocacy Conference, and that's open to anyone. And I will advocate for your children's success. So I'll send that to Emily. There is a cost on that. I think it's $15, but I don't see it listed on here. So.
Thank you, Karen, and I apologize for jumping over you on the agenda. All right, that's it for community organization updates, and so we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's okay. We're going to be having a break at 1:45. So right now it's time to turn our attention to priority setting, and Shauna was going to facilitate that. And so we'll go to that part of the agenda and take our break in about half an hour.
Well, actually, I was going to suggest to take the break now and then do the priority setting activity all in one lump rather than splitting it into two pieces. It would make more sense fluid-wise.
Okay, let's do that. So let's take a 15-minute break. It's 1:20, so let's come back at 1:35, and we'll start our priority setting.
Questions filled, and these teachers are struggling and to meet the needs of the student with disabilities, to also meet the needs of all their other students, and to feel like they're doing a good job at their job. And that's, I think, the biggest frustration is that we want to have these students included in our gen ed classrooms. We want to be successful at our jobs, but if you're constantly putting out fires, you can't be productive. So
it's a shortage of support personnel.
Yep, shortage of support personnel and paraprofessionals specifically, and also kind of like we talked about the follow through with tier 2 and support staff. So when we bring somebody into team, kind of they're like, okay, well that's hard. Well, differentiate, and it's like, like we're doing the best I can, but like I need more support. So as a teacher, and I know how to support these students, but even though it's written into their IEP and it's, they're given this many hours a week of this, it's the kind of the response from admin and from the district, from the director of special ed, is like our hands are tied, like nobody wants the jobs. So.
Do you feel like this is representative of teachers?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay, no questions. Yeah. Okay, good. That's exactly the sort of thing we want to hear here. Okay, thank you. The issue, maybe just a little bit of background, not too long, but gets right to the point. That was a great modeling of it. Thank you, Emma. Let's go around this way. Mallory, how about you?
I would second that one, and as support in the classrooms. And another one I'd like to add is behavior in schools.
What about behavior in schools?
The student behavior in schools, what is appropriate for teachers to, what teacher training is provided, pre-service training, in-service training, are we getting that training? And also, how are students being protected? How are what's in place to protect students? What's in place for students to advocate for themselves if they have those needs, those social emotional needs, those types of things. I think we're seeing more now than ever that students are having higher social emotional needs, and it's exhibiting itself through negative behaviors in the classroom.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a huge gamut of things that you just talked about. But that's
Yeah.
And can I add to that, but specific to, in addition to, but specifically gen ed teachers, because if gen ed teachers don't have the support or understanding on behavior, whether it's a child with a diagnosed disability or not, then that child and the teacher struggle substantially more, and it might be an automatic refer to special education.
And the teachers want the training too. It's not just
helping empower them so that they can tackle it on the front lines. And
so there's really two aspects to this. One is the teacher situation, teacher how to do it, and one is the student how to advocate for the self, that sort of thing. Two aspects. Okay, thank you, Mallory. Sarah.
First year on, first meeting. But I was already like, ooh, I'm fired up already. But no, in all reality, that is kind of universally things just from the parents that I have spoken to. The idea of what great looks like, but we're settling for good. And so it's that, well, it's good enough in regards to student support within the classroom, which I think overarchingly is a safety concern. And when I hear about different things, the emotional support and the lack of, in classroom support, to me, it eventually will lead to my biggest concern, along with, I think, fellow parents, which is true safety of the children in the classrooms, whether it be from, whatever gamut. And if you have the idea of this is what the right thing and the great thing looks like, but you can only deliver on good, you have to have a plan in place to recognize and adjust appropriately to safeguard the great.
Very good.
That makes sense.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Melissa.
I like the things that are being said. I agree with having highly trained staff, being able to meet the needs of the students, and being able, you receive training, but being able to take that back in the classroom and implement it with fidelity, I guess, is what I want to say. So I just agree with some of the things that have already been said.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Steve.
I would go with parent participation in the IEP process to develop actually workable IEPs that both allow kids in a regular classroom. So remove some of the generic. In particular, when I look at the IEP, there's the goals, which are great, but the real meat of the IEP is in those accommodation structures. But those have all become so generalized, extended time. Like teachers all the time, well, I've never seen an accommodation in order to do in my class. You shouldn't be able to say that as a teacher. Like I said that as a teacher, and I realized, wait, I shouldn't be able to say that.
Okay.
Targeting those supports that actually give teachers direction and allow parents to say, this is what my kid needs in that, and make them equal partners in it rather than just be like, we wrote this document, here, sign it.
Yeah.
Okay. So more parent participation in the IEP, more meaningful
quality.
parenting.
Yeah, more participation by regular education teachers too. We're often told I've often brought an IEP and said, just sign the bottom.
Mandatory IEP education for parents when your child is enrolled in special, programs. I mean, really, fundamentally, a lot of it's just I don't know what I don't know as a parent, and
I couldn't imagine if I wasn't a teacher. I think about parents who don't have the training I have and who haven't written 500 IEPs. Like, how do they even begin to navigate that process? So,
no, that's a great issue.
As a segue to that, I'll have to, the Utah Parent Center's partners in the IEP process, highly recommended workshop. Yeah. That will help attending that workshop, and it's free, helps parents understand and gives them what they need, helps them navigate the IEP process.
first time I heard about it was today.
And goodness,
no,
we're trying to reach more people. I would add to that we're there for phone calls, and they're unlimited and free too, to chat and talk about things. But we're seeing a lot of, like, just this year, especially with Start School, we're seeing the calls that come in, the team is already really elevated, and the dispute is already really high. And that's a really hard place to be at the beginning of the year when you're just starting. And so we're just seeing we're seeing a huge increase in, like, dispute resolution and people just kind of coming in on already big issues instead of, like, generalized questions about the process and stuff like that we can walk through.
Is there a theme in the disputes? Like, is it?
I was going to say, like, behavior and using the least restrictive behavior interventions before you throw a kid in a room and leave them there kind of thing. We're seeing a lot, the LRBI using those, understanding that you actually need to do a functional behavior assessment, figure out what's causing the behavior, not print off a sheet from the website and check off behavior interventions, stuff like that. I would say behavior is huge right now. It's a real struggle.
And I would add one more thing onto mine. Just the resistance towards inclusion of students with disabilities across in public education is huge.
I would say even before the IEP starts, because the phone calls that I'm getting are people who can't even get the IEP started. They're being, and they don't understand the process. They don't understand what they need to do to get that process begun. So that's, I see as another communication issue. If a parent's coming to the teacher because they see the kid struggling, the teacher's probably also told them the kid's doing poorly. But there seems to be a disconnect between at what point do we let that kid stop doing poorly and actually do something to intervene. So, but that's kind of what I see a lot of in the phone calls that we get.
Okay, that's good information. Yes, Karen.
I was just going to add, I talked to somebody who the school refused to test her daughter because they said, well, she's doing fine. She did well on her SAGE. She doesn't have an issue, and she does. And the mom's really trying to get something done on it. So, yeah, the education part is important.
All right. Good. Okay, Michelle.
I like, as far as the IEP goes, I think parents need to have something, like, built in to help that they're already understanding, giving them some education on it when, I don't know. I mean, I know sometimes people try and explain, but something that's required, that's like, hey, if your child's here, this is what we would like. You know what I mean? This is what gets sent home. This is what, or something that gives them some more information than what they're getting, because it is hard for them to navigate.
Yeah. To add to that, I think that information should go out before the IEP meeting, because I think a lot of educators and admin and LEA reps sit down and they want to get it signed and done because a meeting takes a lot of people's schedules to line up. So if the parent could have that time before everybody else has to, schedule that actual physical meeting, I think that'd be better.
Yes, and thank you. We're just admiring the problems right now, not solving them. Okay. Let's keep admiring and stating what they are. There are lots of solutions out there, and parents need more training. Well, this is how you get them. Okay, obviously there's a disconnect between the parents and getting the training. They must not know about it or something like that. But let's not solve the problem here. We're trying to establish priorities so that we can then take that step in terms of solving recommendations to the state, that sort of thing. So thank you. Yeah. You're doing great. Just we're admiring now. We're not solving. Michelle.
Let me see if I can actually do this. Okay. I would say that I've seen a lot of calls coming in from parents who have experience with schools where they are not, same thing, they're not doing the evaluations for special education, and they're also not really communicating the reason as to why. So if they're going to go through the multi-tiered support, they're not explaining that to the parents, and then oftentimes I don't think any of that's actually happening. They're just told, maybe we'll do a 504 plan eventually, let's just wait on that, let's not do the evaluation, we'll see how this year goes. But that has kind of been cyclical, and sometimes it goes several years before an evaluation is ever done. And even then, it's usually after intervention of the parent center or the DLC.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about that? We were looking at that at the Parent Center. Is the next step in that due process? Because how else do you appeal a child find denial?
You can go through the state complaint process.
Okay.
But you can also.
So state complaint works too.
Yeah, but the due process period is obviously, it's a longer statute, so it gives you the 2 years instead of the 1.
That's true. Okay.
But in terms of trying to recoup services, it's for the entire period of the deprivation, not just.
Okay. We just had that question and we weren't sure where to go with it because we're seeing an increase. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And I would also say I've seen some issues in terms of the comprehensiveness of the evaluations that are done, even when they are evaluated for special education. And what I mean by that is a lot of the behavior issues. Students will come in and the parents are wanting them evaluated in that area, but the schools just won't do it. They look at reading and writing and math. And so parents are asking for something to be done, an evaluation to be done. And oftentimes, if the school finally agrees to do a functional behavior assessment, it will be, I would say, just very cut and paste. It's not often done by somebody with what I would consider sufficient training and education in that area. And then, not surprisingly, nothing really happens moving forward in terms of creating a valuable behavior intervention plan. I've also, sorry, I get a lot of calls. Just some issues in terms of, I think, training for certain districts, but certainly for charter schools in terms of the disciplinary procedures and their requirements of a manifestation determination hearing, timelines for those, how they're supposed to be done, what parent participation looks like in there, what items are supposed to be considered. I feel like there have been some very serious violations in that area. And I guess the shortage of support personnel is also huge. We do hear that a lot of things just can't be done at schools because there's no one to do it, which I find to be very problematic. And finally, I think I would like to see, and perhaps be very involved in, just more training to see if we can provide parents with the tools to be effective advocates through the dispute resolution process. So, I mean, filing complaints, due process, those sort of things, because I think the Parent Center does an excellent job of training as far as the IEP process goes. But I am getting just a lot of questions and a lot of
issue of being able to identify when a parent or a child is struggling and access evaluation period and have that evaluation data be looked at with the right lens. Having the special education team and the LEA understand what learning disability is, and with the different ways of identifying learning disability. And I think now with the new patterns of strengths, I can never say that one, my tongue doesn't wrap around it, strengths and weaknesses model that districts can adopt if they don't have a complete multi-tiered system in place. Or response to intervention system. I think that would be important for us as a panel to understand, because I think I don't understand it fully, even though I'm trying to, but I think it has some significance in that issue of assessment and what assessment looks like in eligibility. But the other thing that for me and those that I talk to as parents that we've had a lot of concern about is that implementation of the IEP. So once you do get the IEP, there's different things in the school that become barriers to that implementation, like paraprofessionals, when you do get them hired, leaving instead of providing the services, and your child not being able to communicate that to you until it's been a month without their occupational therapy services because nobody showed up for it. I think those resources and having consistent implementation of those resources and having them implemented within the time frame that the law says and not a month into school or those things are important concerns for me.
Okay. Thank you, Summer. All right, Jennifer.
Okay, so I want to kind of go off of his
as far as IEPs go, but I don't think it's necessarily just parent support. I've come from a different state, and I am just shocked at how not seriously IEP meetings are taken. I've walked into IEP meetings where it was just me and a special ed teacher. You know what I mean? And like that has been a big concern to me, where I'm trying to discuss accommodations that the classroom teacher is going to have to do, or an aide is going to have to be in the room to do. And there's nobody to talk about it with, because the special ed teacher's like, well, I'm not in the classroom. I can't help with that. You know what I mean? And I'm like, how do we implement this? How do we decide if this can be an accommodation when the whole team's here and the whole team isn't taking it seriously? And then my other was lack of teacher preparation in the field of dyslexia. It's a lot of times our parents are hearing dyslexia doesn't exist. I don't know how to help a student with dyslexia, and teachers aren't trained. There is a lack of training when it comes to
Specifically to dyslexia.
Specifically to dyslexia.
Okay. All right. Janelle.
Okay, so I had a couple of thoughts. Okay, I mentioned a next step to a previous priority, which was on the development of the alternate diploma. I talked to Leah about it. She needs to get some more data, and so that one I'm going to table. But the other thing is the statewide improvement plan, the indicators, the APR, that indicator on transitions and stuff. That's one of the reasons we're in needs assistance, and that, like Leah said, that is something that we can fix. It's fixable. I know I went to the transition thing at the special ed law conference, and even though I have a special ed degree, I was an elementary teacher, so I kind of tuned out transition plans, and I learned a lot. And the transition plans I wrote, because I was middle school last year, I realized I was doing them all wrong, and so don't inspect my files from last year. Let me fix them and stuff. But that, with proper, training, that's something that can be addressed easily. And then there's the parent opt-out, which would be harder to address, but that's impacting us, and it could drop us down to the NI level, needs intervention, because we've got 4 years in a row it needs assistance, but that one thing alone can drop us down another level. But it's state law, so it's going to be a PR thing more than anything else, and stuff. But yeah, transition plans.
Okay. And considering low-hanging fruit is not a bad idea. And then maybe you could have more than one priority, because that one might be easily addressed and something new taken on. Food for thought as we go along. Karen.
Okay, one of my big concerns is having high expectations for students, meaning that a lot of times people just, they have a disability, here, I'll let you do this easy thing, or they don't push them or encourage them to see what they can accomplish, or give them the accommodations or the encouragement or whatever to do what they actually can do. And so I think I would like to see a cultural change with people looking at people with disabilities, saying, okay, you've got things that are hard for you, but you've got things that you're good at, talents, let's find out what those are, and let's use those to the best of your ability. Also, I think this kind of goes along with this is a lot of times in schools, general ed teachers kind of feel like, you're a special ed student. I don't have to worry about you. The special ed teacher will take care of you. And if there was something we could do where the teachers were trained more, or kind of had the thought that we're in this together. I'm working with the special ed teacher. We're working together to help the student, not just I get to forget about it. In the PTA resolution, actually, it mentions that, and part of that starts with the teacher coming to the IEP meetings, that it mentions that a relevant general educator should be present at IEP meetings. So I think if we could do something to build the idea of teamwork, we're in this together to work together for the good of the student.
Great, thank you. Okay, Shelley.
Okay. Well, as the director of special ed, I could say amen to everything everyone else has said, and those are challenges that we face all the time. But I would say our biggest unmet need leads directly to Tanya's update that she gave about
less students in day treatment types of facilities and for shorter stays, because when they're not in those facilities and their stay is shorter, that doesn't necessarily mean that need has been met, the reason that they're there. And then they all come back to school. And we don't know they're coming sometimes. There's no transition communication. So we have no safety plan in place. And we're seeing, as everyone has discussed, higher and higher rates of students with very aggressive behaviors, which is why we can't retain para staff, which is why we can't find para staff, which is why we can't retain teacher staff. And teachers have concerns about where is this line for my own safety. And this is the issue, this issue of students with high acuity mental health issues in our schools. We're education entities. We are not mental health entities. And so we are not prepared. And you see it every day. And we know we're not prepared. But it comes back to a resource issue. Like, I know what I would love to do about that. I have lots of ideas. And I don't have the means to make it happen. So there's that, and it's trickling down. So I'm, in my time in this field, I am seeing, 10 years ago, the students who were referring for more restrictive placements are now the students who are sitting in our gen ed classes, because it all trickles down. So our students in our highest, most restrictive environments for behavior are students that would have been in another placement 10 years ago. So it just backs everything up. Does that make sense? And we're also seeing lots of kids with lots of trauma coming into schools very young, K1, with lots of things that we're just not ready for as a system. And we would love to be ready for those things.
Just for whatever it's worth, Shelley, you captured what in other advisory panels in other states that I've talked to, they call this is a mental health issue.
It is.
That is big in the school, and it's not being addressed very well by anybody.
No, and it's across the country, right? It's not just us, and we know that. But it's really, I feel like I've been admiring this problem now this is the beginning of my 4th year admiring this problem, and it's super frustrating as someone who should have the capacity to change it so that teachers' lives are better, so that kids are safe in school, so that kids can be included more. I want all of those things, just like everybody else does. But this, to me, these are a lot of really good needs, but this is our biggest unmet need that I see. Yes.
Talking to parents, one of the things I hear when I talk to parents about it is access to mental health care is really tricky, even for parents who have insurance, because they are limited. As a parent, I have a student who has a massive anxiety disorder, horrible anxiety disorder. He can only see his therapist once a month. That's not enough. The school can only offer him 30 minutes of services a month.
If they can.
So access to that is,
if they can offer them at all.
And the sad thing is it brushes onto teachers that's a role that we are not prepared to play. It's not, I don't think it's not a lack of willingness from teachers, but we're not prepared to play that role.
Well,
you can't play all the roles.
Right. The mental health thing, though, I mean, it's just on such a huge spectrum, from single isolated incidents to the whole, to what's going on around the country right now. Like, it's just such a big, there's just this cloud over teachers from talking to all my coworkers about safety in schools and why we have all the new drills that we have to have, everything like that. And so I think for teachers, that's a big one as well.
Well, and I think part of the issue stems around that from a legal standpoint, schools are the only agency that cannot back away from the table. So you have all these other agencies that they can if they want to, and they don't have to, and we are the only ones that have to. So that makes it hard.
All right, Amanda.
What Shelley said, a lot of what Karen said, thematically, the conversations I have with many players, whether they're teachers, whether they're parents, whether in a lot of different realms, is really what it comes down to as a systemic issue that, like, if we don't have the Is it on? You give me that look. I'm like, oh, am I on? If we don't figure out a way to do systemic change on how each school functions, each district functions, when we're talking about all of these smaller components of it, they're small offshoots to a bigger issue that if we really aren't changing the mindset on individuals with disabilities or behavior issues or whatever, if the structure and flow of a classroom or a school doesn't change to better support kids that are more complex, to be able to give them their legal rights to the gen ed setting or the different settings that make sense for them, then it's just a fail. And so to me, the big unmet need is change the system. Change how you approach these classroom settings where gen ed is separate from special ed, clear from the classroom, clear up to the superintendent, across the board. Because if it's continually approached that this is a classroom setting for non-disabled peers and this is the classroom setting for the disabled peers, whenever you're trying to break that barrier of my child has rights to the gen ed setting, you know, going into all the legislative law, but the breakdown occurs is that setting is not set up generally and thematically across the way to have that be a successful setting that it very well can be. And so it's pushback on we're doing more than we do for others or whatever type things. But if we fix that to where it's more routine, it's not so unachievable anymore.
And inclusion. Something real quick. One thought that I had too was having this culture of thought of looking at, which is what the law outlines, looking at the general placement and then making accommodations and supports beyond that. But I think when we sit down as with the specialist and IEP, they start with what they know. Where if we did have the culture of like a general education teacher saying this is the environment and then the specialist saying, well, this is how we can help this child access it, I think that things would be different. And so that is a concern I share too, is the mindset of who is leading on this can shape what the environment seems to be acceptable of.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Amy. So you just turned it out. There you go.
There we go. One of the
all educators who get licensed will have to do the module on ethics. They'll have to do the module on suicide prevention and intervention, and would have to do a model on special education law and programming. All educators. Is that what you were asking about? Okay. Yes, that has already passed. Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2 ideas each. 1 idea per card. No more than 3 to 7 words.
Well, that would go on, but
do it again.
Oh no. Okay.
Okay, does everybody
It's time for
have
me to
their
wake up.
cards done? Is there anyone who's not done writing? Okay, we'll give you just another minute. Don't worry about it. Okay, look at your 2 cards, and I want you to hold up behind you, just above your head, the one that you feel is the most important of the 2. Please. And it's already hard enough to down to 2. Thank you.
This is a big decision here.
Come on.
I think we were getting 2.
Thank you.
I know.
Here's that one.
That was like it's a chicken and egg.
Because if they're educated, they will go with us.
All right.
I know.
Thank
Thank you.
I gave the. I'm having stress about her.
I really rewrote that one. There's so many problems.
So is it
All right. You know, those of you who have got your back to me over here, if you'll turn your chairs just a little bit, and let's look through these together, okay? Access to support services. Now, this doesn't simply mean PERS, does it?
No.
Support services,
Just all
related
support
services,
services,
all support
everybody.
services. Support in classrooms. The IEP process, education required for parents. Mental health. Allowing for meaningful parental participation in the IEP process. You guys are tricky there. Yeah. Using, short words. Teaming models to support successful inclusion. IEP involvement. Indicator 13 and transition plans. High expectations by all. Resources for supporting student behavior. High expectations for students with disabilities. Transition plans, consideration for exceptions. Is that about the medically fragile children, Amy? Okay. Behavior support in classrooms. Lack of support personnel for teachers and students. Parent training. IEP process with high expectations. I thought we said one idea.
It's the same. That's me. It's the same. If you're going to train, no. If you're going to train parents about the IEP process, I think high expectations has to be a top part of that.
What would you say of the three concepts that are on here?
There's one. That's one. Training the parents in the IEP process.
To expect
Two.
high
With
expectations.
high
How
expectations.
the wording of a high expectation.
No.
It's a quality IEP.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now,
I can do it in short
On other people's
IEP, parent education. Support services in the classroom, follow through. What does that mean?
That means that not just written in, actual.
Okay.
I need to bring some of these down for you.
Behavior. Very good. Okay. I'm going to just group a few things here for a minute, okay? We've got high expectations and high expectations.
Old school.
Support in classrooms. I'm going to set over here. Behavior support in classrooms, which is a little different. Resources for supporting student behavior. IEP process is one. Mental health, I'm going to move it over here. Transition and transition. IEP parent education. Same right there. Allowing for meaningful parent participation in the IEP process. That's not quite parent education, but it's close.
I think it's
similar. Right?
Yeah. Same goal.
Okay.
Same thing.
Same goal.
Teaming models support successful inclusion. That's kind of different from everything else, isn't it?
That's what I meant with my lack of support personnel. Like if we want to have them in there, but
So the one by your right elbow, right where your head is.
lack of support.
There you go. That one, right?
Support personnel for teachers and students.
That, putting it clear over to your teaming, up top left.
I wrote the teaming one.
Are they similar, or is that about access to support services?
I think
what you're saying.
But it all supports
It's when-
inclusion. You can't
Yeah.
include.
I wrote the teaming one, and what I meant is that having that team in place so that inclusion can be supported.
Right.
So that's what I meant too with my support services in the classroom.
I think those two kind of go together, the support classrooms and the team of support.
We're not talking about like co-teaching models. We're talking about having a team. Okay.
Okay. IEP involvement, does that fit here with the parent
Yes.
piece? Okay. And mental health is off there by itself.
Can you put that with behavior?
I think mental
Kind of
health
pair it
would
in
be
there?
access to support and behavior all together.
Yeah.
Put it there alongside, knowing that it's an aspect.
I feel like to the top left category and the behavior category, they're kind of
Go together as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
I think those all encompass sort of the same problem.
Right.
We'll put these over here, and we'll put these in the neighborhood. How's that? Okay.
Then you might as well put high expectations with high IEP.
Well, you're gonna have to
But IEP to me is different than high expectations by all, because the IEP is only focused on their educational plan, which is a component of developing high expectations. But to me, the high expectation plays into a mind shift for everybody from superintendent clear down every single player in the entire system on earth to comprehend that our kids are capable of exceeding more than maybe some perceive them to be.
Right.
So I feel like that's a massive offshoot there.
Support in classroom, I think, and access to support, I think those go with the
I
two
agree.
on the left, the two categories on the left.
We're here about team.
Yeah, it goes
Right.
right in between them.
Does everyone
The
agree with
behavior
that?
and
I think they're all sort of
Okay.
basically dealing with the same thing, getting kids what they need.
Right.
All right. That's very good. Okay. Your second card, if it's
In there.
There's no if. Give me your second card. Thank you. Sometimes when you're doing a consensus workshop, you ask people for the one that's the most different. But here where we're looking for what the group is, then you just take everything. Thank you. I'm wondering if that camera's following me around the room.
It might be.
Keep going. All right. Check that out. All right. Here we go. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. We're gonna group these now as they happen. Okay. Para support should be down here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That whole column. Mental health.
Behavior, mental health, far left, middle.
Here we go. Goes with that. Behavior again. Now, access to support in classrooms. Behavior is one small component of that. Do you want to group them all together?
No.
Not yet. Okay. Mental health / behavior using LRBI. Foster kiddos. Delays in testing, IEP, and transition. That's specific about foster kids. And it's different from what else is going on, isn't it? Okay. More meaningful IEPs. This is about parent education and parent involvement in the IEPs. Is more meaningful IEPs different than that?
Well, you still got
No.
meaningful up there at the top too.
Yeah.
Like meaningful. Okay.
The IEP involvement, I had meant like the entire team, not just parents.
Okay.
Like everybody being involved.
Right.
Okay.
So maybe the high expectations by all?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, the more meaningful IEPs might fit more with the high expectations, because you want to write IEPs that are meaningful. It's not a parent involvement one. So that, I think, I agree with Mallory. I think the more meaningful IEPs on the green card should be moved over with high expectation. That green card on the right.
above the pink.
Yeah.
So I wrote that one. I guess what I was thinking is, like I said, no. Oh,
Yep. Here.
oh yeah.
Oh, we should turn them all off.
Is like I talked about how like it's not just like slapped down for you to, you know, how there's discussion and everyone involved in it.
Okay. Okay.
We don't have to make all of these connect. Okay, that's not the goal here. If there's really a discrete thing that needs attention, let's leave it discrete. It'll actually accomplish more than trying to eat the whole elephant at once. You can eat bites of it at one time and get the work started. Professional development for support staff, the bare minimum. Para support, all players support quality inclusion. All right. Mental health support in school. General ed teachers on the team. Would this be teaming?
Or more meaningful IEP involvement.
Okay. I think we need to separate these out.
I wrote the one about the general ed teachers on the team, and I meant for them to think of themselves as working with the special ed teachers. So I'm not.
More about teaming models then. How you intended it.
Well, the IEP, the IEP team, not just on IEPs, but also in all aspects. You know.
Well, this doesn't say
Yeah.
specifically
Okay.
IEP, so I think it fits better there. Indicator 8, meaningful parent involvement. If it's specifically about indicator 8, it's different. then everything else is going on here. Or if you're trying to raise your bar for indicator 8.
Parents, is it the parent percent of parents?
Yeah, indicator 8 is the one about the meaningful parent involvement, and so it's the indicator about how the parents are perceived, if they are perceiving that they're a part of the team and they're being given involvement, and so it goes along with the parent involvement in the IEP.
Way to make us use our cards. Yes, job there,
But that's one of the areas on the state APR that we haven't met target, and that's something that can be fixed. It's low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely agreed. Transitions. Here, shortage of trained personnel support. Personal, is it personal or personnel? Who wrote this one?
Oh, it's mine. I don't know how to spell.
Oh,
personnel.
Okay, personnel. Okay, because personal support would go along with paras and specific services.
Oh, yeah, paraprofessionals and
all right,
and behavior support aides and
training requirements for the support team. Is that here as well? Training's a little different, but it's there. Okay, mental health support. We've got here equity and involvement in IEP for all stakeholders. Equity and involvement in the IEP for all stakeholders. Does that fit it with meaningful IEPs? Yeah.
I think it fits with parents.
It fits with where, Steve?
I wrote that one. It fits with parents. To me, it's about the IEP team should be a team, right? It should have a parent involved in the process of drafting the IEP. And it should have a regular education teacher involved. So I would put it with the IEP process.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then behavior support. Okay. Now,
The pink IEP one, you can move back up with the others.
This
That's exactly what he just said.
So these two kind of bring it into a cohesive whole. Okay, and this one is related to it, but just a little bit different specifically to foster kids. All right, well, look at your board there. You've got this mass of things that deal with behavior, mental health, and support in classrooms. It's a big chunk to chew if you're going to choose it as a priority as a whole. Do you think it would be better to focus in specifically on mental health issues, to specifically focus on para support, which many of you mentioned specifically, or specifically talk about behavior services for kids?
If you've got the psychologist and the BHA, I think kind of the teaming and the collaboration of support services kind of encompasses all of that a little bit.
Again, we're back to I'm not sure you're going to be able to ever find the beginning point of where the solutions are. It's a chicken and egg thing, Stephen?
I would think, just based on the conversations that have been happening at the state level this year, there's already a movement towards mental health and towards providing those services through the school. I think that's a great train to jump on because there's already momentum heading towards it. That conversation has already been started, so we're not starting that conversation from scratch. We're just adding to it, and that allows that's more power to a movement that's already there.
Yes. Okay, Mallory.
May I ask, I know what we advise, but Leah, do you have thoughts on where the state is at this time on this?
On all of those issues?
Or do you have a preference?
Let me just preface just a little bit here. I was at another state training 10 days ago, and the priorities that they came up with were great. They were really good. And then the state director said, just so you know, there's already a task force in place in another department that's taking care of this one. Do you want to hit it as well, or do you want to do something different? And that, I think, is kind of the information we're looking for here. Yeah. Is there anything going on in the state from your perspective that's already addressing these that may change our focus as to whether it should be a priority here?
So Steve's right. There's a huge push for improving mental health services.
From what you know, is it including kids with disabilities in the conversation? Okay.
It is including students with disabilities. So he's completely right that choosing to participate could be helpful. At the same time, because there already is a big push, you might want to choose something else to work on instead. So behavior support is totally relevant. Teaming, we probably have fewer resources related to teaming. That's one of the reasons that we hired Casey, Dupart, that you met this morning, is to really work on teaming. We can always use help with improving the IEP process. Obviously, transition is one of our state priorities.
That's one that Leah mentioned earlier. It's set to be solved.
High expectations. I mean, there's momentum already around improving expectations for students with disabilities. So that's also a really salient topic, and there is momentum, and we've made progress. And so working on that, we might even be able to make more progress. So,
okay,
with Aunt Mallory, did that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are some things going on around this. There are some things going around this. There are some things being addressed here. That doesn't mean we can't do them, and it's like Steve said, it might provide some additional momentum.
Right.
Yes, Shelley.
I was going to say, on the transitions one, just from a compliance standpoint, they know the state is doing poorly on that because we know we're doing poorly on that, so a lot of districts are addressing that.
Okay.
Improving transition plans, I know we are. I know many of my colleagues on the Wasatch Front are. It's a priority for all of us. Just throwing that out there.
All right, Amanda?
My question, Leah, and maybe I missed it, is where you guys said there's already momentum in behavior and mental health and conversation going on there. Is that more of a broad conversation where it would be a good idea for our panel to jump on board to make sure that we're having dialogue around the special education component, which is what our general focus is. So we're making sure that aspect isn't being forgotten about in that broader mental health behavior conversation.
So it certainly will not hurt. It's a really important issue, and the state is concerned about it. Luckily for our state, the legislature is actually concerned. It's obviously a very complicated and difficult issue, but students with disabilities are not being left out of the conversation. I mean, the conversation is definitely including, and to be very frank, part of the reason is that many students with disabilities are students with disabilities because of, or in part because of, mental illness. And the students who are requiring the most intensive services, besides students with significant cognitive disabilities and students with severe autism, is students with mental health issues. So the services and supports for them are very expensive. And unfortunately, they are few and far between. So there is momentum, and students with disabilities are not being left out, but it's an important and complicated issue.
Okay. Amanda and then Gina. Sorry, not Amanda, Michelle.
Michelle. Oh, I would just say I agree, and I think that it probably would be really important if the advisory panel could kind of weigh in on the situation as it does affect kids with disabilities, because otherwise I think there's a chance that would get lost with the legislature.
Do we ever just write statements from this board, versus getting too deep into corrective action stuff? As just a generalized support statement based off of a discussion happens in this meeting? Does that happen?
You can make recommendations that don't have to do with your priorities. Like if legislation came up and you wanted to be able to say, hey, we've talked about this particular piece of legislation. It isn't one of our 3 priorities, but we talked about this piece of legislation, and state board, we want you to know that this is how we feel about it. Yeah, they will certainly accept. I mean, if that's what you're talking about, something outside.
You still be influential on things that matter without being so tunneled into the 2 things. Like there may be other things that come up that you'd like to say, hey, as a statement piece from this group, we've collaboratively, have an opinion about this.
You have that opportunity, yeah, and the state board will ask as well. If there are issues that the state board wants you to consider, they will send me with those issues to put on the agenda to have you consider.
Okay, hang on. Gina was next, and then these two. Gina, go ahead.
Mine's data too, I guess. Well, I kind of like Sarah's approach to that, just my opinion, because I've been following what our local school district and some of our charter schools have been doing, and they are really involved with this mental health piece. And when I look at the information that's been coming to my house, I'm like, what would I really add to it? Like, what would this group really add that people aren't already talking about? And it just seems like there wouldn't be a whole lot more we'd be adding, except for maybe a statement that says, hey, make sure you don't forget about us. But everything I've read and that I've seen is they're not. So to me, to make that a priority that people have already made a priority, feels like we'll just sort of be spinning our wheels and advising on things people are already getting a lot of advice on and working on.
So there's a recommendation that way. Okay, Shelley, and then someone over here. Shelley, go ahead.
I just wanted to, on the mental health piece, weigh in too as far as students with disabilities go. I have a hunch, I don't have like firm data on this, but I could go back, that there are kids who end up becoming eligible as students with disabilities who may not have been had they had the mental health supports they needed when they needed them.
All right, and there was a hand over here. Again, Steve, go ahead, sorry.
So one of the challenges we faced, and I know people in my situation faced it, is my son doesn't have a diagnosis of autism, but a lot of the services that are provided are specific to students with diagnosis of autism. But he would benefit from those services, and the school districts and other providers are resistant because he lacks that diagnosis because his anxiety disorder. So I think part of it is we have to look at, are we tunneling our funds and are we tunneling our just to one specific group, and it might be able to say, hey, this program can work for a lot of these kids, but if we label it as a very specific program, that becomes an issue. That becomes an access issue for a lot of parents out there. Like, my kid doesn't have this, but he can't get these programs that would be very beneficial and available to a large percentage of people.
Okay, let me stop the group for a minute. We're at to the time where we have to choose. Okay, and we could do this for hours. Seen it happen. So we could do this for hours, but we're going to have to pin down. The questions is, which ones do you want to work on? Shauna, would suggest no more than 2. You can go 3, but then it makes you thin rather than deep when you work on it as a panel. So the question is, do you want to address the transition question that is the low-hanging fruit that got talked about before? Just a basic yes, no, other stuff's more important. Did you vote? Shall we vote? Do you want to do it that way?
Can we make a list of options?
Well, that's true. Well, let me do this. Let me make a list of options that's separate. Okay, so transition is one. High expectations is another. The meaningful IEPs. Okay.
That's all of those.
Meaningful IEPs. Mental health is one big one. The teaming models. And the para support? You want?
Yeah.
So that's para support and behavior support.
And foster kiddos.
And the foster kiddos. Thank you.
I'm getting my vote.
All right. If you go by volume, the foster kiddo would come off as a priority because there was only one. And I think for our purposes and discussion, we ought to do that to help us get
And
faster.
we did do youth in custody. I guess my microphone's good too. We did do youth in custody and foster care, not last year, but the year before. So
it has been addressed.
Yeah, you can look on the website to see what the recommendations were, and then we can, but we could consider following up. But we'll send you a link so you can see what was already recommended.
Okay, it's time to vote. You get 2 votes, okay? And I'm going to count them, so I need you to raise your hands high. Who wants to work on transition? 1, 2, 3. Okay? On the high expectations culture concept. 1, 2, 3. Remember, you get 2 votes.
There's a
One over here, too. I forgot we got two. Sorry.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sorry. 10. Thank you. Mental health. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. On the teaming models to support inclusion. 1, 2. Okay. Behavior support. Raise them high.
I just have a question.
Yes.
So the behavior support and the para and the more resources for the classroom, that's kind of confusing to me where those are breaking out.
I think from my perspective as I heard it, para support is for everything. Behavior is about behavior.
Okay.
They are related, but paras is more about the larger
Just
support.
having the staff in the classroom,
Yeah.
but also speech OT was all in there.
Right.
Okay.
Behavior support. 1, 2. Okay? And para support. The larger availability of services.
Bring on behavior, by the way.
Thank you. Sorry, I must have missed somebody. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Well, very quickly, you came up with morning meaningful IEPs is the first one. Mental health is the next one, and the parent support and high expectations are close third.
Kind of nice.
How many do you want? 2, 3, 4.
I say 3.
Pick 3? Okay, so we have to vote again if we have 3 between high expectations and para support. You get 1 vote this time. High expectations for all. This is between it and para support 1. Raise your hands high. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I'm assuming everybody else will be high expectations. No. Sorry. Sorry. I'm assuming everybody else will be the para. Is that right? Well, then paras get it. Okay. There you go. Now, the next steps before you get started are Janelle will need to take these areas and decide how she wants to approach these with Leah in terms of task forces, in terms of resources, in terms of how you're going to come up with the recommendations. They're broad. Try and focus in on them as you do it, but you've got them, and well done. That was a lot of work in 1 minute to get everybody's ideas. Well done.
Leah has days open because she's got lots and lots of meetings. And so this summer we met and looked at Leah's calendars, and these are days that she penciled us in. So Wednesday, November 14th, Friday, February 22nd, and Friday, April 19th. Is there any one date that is that all of us aren't going to be, is there any one date that most of us would not be able to attend that we need to change? Okay, so November 14th is a Wednesday. Friday, February 22nd, and Friday, April 19th.
I know I will not be able to make the November, but I'll be at the problem.
Okay.
Midweek is tough.
Is midweek tough for the majority of the panel?
It's hard for me too. Wednesdays. Wednesday's hard for me because I teach a class on campus Wednesday afternoon. So. But
so we're trying to stagger the meetings throughout the year, and we want to have that first meeting be well in advance of January so that Leah can get our input for the February report to the feds.
You could move it to Friday the 16th. I am not available, but I could have a representative here. If you wanted to move it to Friday the 16th, let me see if there's a room.
Fridays are really hard for me, and I can make 2 of them work, and certainly this one today. But it's hard to miss all of our Fridays because we work